I moved to Porto to forget them. I moved to start over. My ex-wife Nadine married her new guy exactly 3 weeks after our divorce papers were stamped. She called him a visionary. She called him a wealthy venture capitalist. My own son Darius sat across from me and announced he'd be standing beside them at the altar because he'd finally found a father figure who actually knew how to build wealth. They had written me off. In their eyes, I was nothing more than a worn-out retired electrician, a man with a modest pension and a shattered heart left to his name. They miscalculated. At that wedding reception, one guest climbed to their feet, delivered a single sentence, and Nadine let out a scream I carry with me to this day. Then, at 2:00 in the morning, my phone rang. But to understand how satisfying that moment truly was, I have to pull you back to where it all unraveled. The name is Clifford Hahn. 74 years old, and for 4 straight decades I made my living as a master electrician, pulling wire through skyscrapers, hospitals, and the very courthouse that had just carved my life in two. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories. I'm glad you're here with me today. Before we get into it, drop a quick comment and let me know, who are you already pulling for in this story? Is it Clifford quietly carrying everything, or is there someone else who's caught your attention? Just a word or two is enough. I read everyone. A small note before we begin: some details in this story have been shaped for the purposes of storytelling, and any resemblance to specific real individuals is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth at the center of it. I was holding the keys to the midnight blue BMW 7 Series, a car I had paid for with overtime shifts and blistered hands. It was the one luxury I had allowed myself in a lifetime of saving. Before I could even reach for the door, a manicured hand, bearing long burgundy acrylic nails, snatched the fob clean out of my grip. It was Nadine. At 65, she was still a striking woman, but the ugliness of her greed had begun to bleed through the surface. She dangled those keys in front of my face like she was taunting a dog. "Don't be pathetic, Clifford," she sneered, her voice carrying loud enough for the passing lawyers to hear. "You know the judge awarded the car to me. It goes with the house, and the 60% of the savings. You don't need a luxury sedan to drive to the library or wherever it is you old men go to waste time." I stood there, my empty hands still hanging in the air. It wasn't about the car. It was about the disrespect. "Nadine," I said, holding my voice low and even. "I maintain that engine. I know every bolt in that chassis. You don't even know what kind of fuel it takes." She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "That is what money is for Clifford. That is what you never understood. You love getting your hands dirty. You love fixing things. That is why you are small. Garrison doesn't fix cars. He buys the dealership. That is the difference between a laborer and a king." Garrison. The name sat in my mouth like something rotten. The man she had been seeing for 6 months behind my back. The man she was now leaving me for. I drew a slow breath, fighting the urge to snatch those keys back. I am a logical man. I work in circuits and currents. Push too much through a circuit, and it blows. Nadine was pushing hard, but I refused to blow. Not here. Not where anyone could see. "Enjoy the ride, Nadine," I told her. "Just remember to change the oil." She rolled her eyes and reached into her designer purse, pulling out a small plastic card and flicking it at my chest. It bounced off my tie and dropped into a puddle of oil on the pavement. "Didn't want you stranded," she said with a smirk. "So I picked you up a transit card. It has $15 on it. Enough to get you to whatever cheap motel you're staying at. Call it a parting gift." I stared down at that card floating in the oil slick. The ultimate insult. 40 years of marriage, a child raised, surgeries, paid for vacations, funded jewelry bought, and my worth had been reduced to a $15 transit card. I bent down to retrieve it, my knees popping a reminder of every year I had carried. As I straightened up and wiped the oil from the card with my handkerchief, a shadow fell across me. It was Darius, my son, my 35-year-old boy. He had squeezed himself into a suit one size too tight, projecting the image of the Wall Street tycoons he admired in films. He was ferrying a box of Nadine's personal items from the trunk, transferring them to her new life. "Darius," I said, stepping toward him. "I'm glad you're here. Maybe we can get dinner later. I need to think through my next move." Darius didn't look at me. His eyes went to his polished shoes. He shifted the box in his arms, keeping his gaze anywhere but mine. "I can't, Dad," he mumbled. "No, Garrison is taking us to that new steakhouse downtown, the one where steaks cost $250. We are celebrating." Celebrating. The word cracked something in me. Celebrating the end of your parents' marriage. Darius finally looked up, and what I found in his expression broke me far more than any divorce decree. Pity and contempt living side by side. "Look, Dad, let's be real," he said, a sudden arrogant confidence sharpening his voice. "You had a good run. You worked hard, but the world has changed. You can't save your way to wealth anymore. Garrison is going to teach me about leverage, about crypto, about venture capital." He paused, glancing toward his mother, already settled in the driver's seat of my BMW, revving the engine with impatience. "You're a good guy, Dad," Darius continued, twisting the knife. "But you're small time. Garrison is a wealthy man, a powerful man. He can open doors for me that you couldn't even unlock. You should be happy for Mom. She finally got the upgrade she deserves." Upgrade. My son had just called another man an upgrade. The man replacing the father who taught him to throw a baseball, who sat up through his fevers, who paid for the college degree he was currently not using. I looked at Darius. I saw the weakness in his chin, the hunger for easy money burning behind his eyes. I understood then that I hadn't simply lost a wife. I had lost a son long ago. I just hadn't seen it, because I had been too busy working to pay for everything they wanted. The horn sounded. "Darius, let's go," Nadine called from the car. "Don't waste your breath on him. He doesn't understand high finance. He thinks being rich means having a savings account." Darius gave me a brief, dismissive nod. "Take care of yourself, Dad. Don't do anything crazy. Maybe find a hobby." He turned his back and walked to the BMW, pulled open the passenger door, and climbed in. He did not look back. Not once. I watched the car surge out of the lot, trailing exhaust. I stood there alone, a greasy transit card in one fist, a small suitcase in the other. Most men would have wept. Most men would have found the nearest bar and drunk the night into oblivion. But I am not most men. I am a master electrician. When a system is corrupted, you don't grieve it. You cut it out. You isolate the fault, and then you build a new circuit. I walked to the bus stop and lowered myself onto the metal bench, its heat pressing through my jacket. I took out my phone. My hands were steady. My pulse beat a slow, heavy rhythm of absolute finality. I scrolled until I found the number for my broker, Mr. Cho. He picked up on the second ring. "Shotzi Clifford, everything go okay in court." "Sell it," I said. My voice was flat, stripped of feeling. "Sell what, Clifford?" "The stocks." "Everything," I said. "The remaining portfolio, the bonds, the antique collection in storage, the land in Virginia. Everything that isn't cash, convert it to cash. Today." Silence on the line. "Clifford, that is a significant liquidation. Are you sure the market is a bit volatile right now? You might lose a few percentage points." "I don't care," I said. watching a city bus grind toward me trailing black smoke. Liquidate it all and wire the funds to the international account we set up last month. The international account, Clifford, are you going somewhere? Yes, I said, as the bus screeched to a stop in front of me. The doors hissed open to reveal a tired driver who looked like he'd long since made peace with hating his job. I stepped up and tapped the oily card Nadine had thrown at me against the reader. It beeped, approved. I am going to Portugal, Mr. Cho, I said, moving to the back of the bus. When? He asked. Tonight, I replied. I ended the call and turned my gaze to the dirty window. The city of Philadelphia, the city I had helped wire with my own hands, drifted past me. My ex-wife believed she had stripped me bare. My son thought I was a failure. They were convinced they had taken everything, but they knew nothing about the patent. They knew nothing about the German energy contract, and they certainly had no idea that by claiming the house and the car, they had chained themselves to a sinking ship while I was already cutting the rope and drifting free. Let them keep the BMW. Let them keep the house. I was about to find out exactly how much leverage Garrison really had. I shut my eyes and let the vibration of the bus engine settle over me. This wasn't the end. This was the opening of their education, and the tuition was going to be very, very expensive. 6 months. That is how long it takes to learn that silence isn't emptiness. It's where answers live. Back in Philadelphia, my life had been a relentless noise of demands. Nadine pushing for a new sunroom. Darius needing bail money for some failed business venture. Brianna griping that our family dinners weren't photogenic enough for social media. But here in Porto, on the terrace of an apartment looking out over the Douro River, the only sounds were the distant ring of a tram and gulls wheeling above the red tile rooftops. I lifted my cup of strong black coffee. Bold, dark, and uncomplicated, exactly the way I like things. My neighbors here take me for a retired pensioner scraping by on Social Security. They see a white-haired man in a linen shirt and comfortable sandals making his way to the market for fresh cod. They treat me with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Bom dia, Senor Clifford. That is what the baker says to me every single morning. He has no idea that the man handing over €2 for a loaf of bread holds the primary patent on the KV400 industrial circuit breaker. No idea that whenever a factory in Berlin fires up its assembly line or a hospital in Tokyo cuts over to emergency power, a fraction of a cent lands in an account Nadine never knew was there. She never once asked about my work. As far as she was concerned, I was a tradesman with grease under his nails. What she never grasped was that electricity is its own language, and I was one of a handful of people alive who could write poetry in it. I had kept that patent close, not out of avarice, but out of self-preservation, my safety net. And now it was something better my way out. I lifted my cup from the saucer and held it a moment, letting the warmth soak into my palms. I was breathing again, genuinely breathing. Blood pressure down the old ghost pains in my spine gone quiet. I was on the edge of sealing off the past for good. Then the phone skittered across the mosaic tabletop, with a buzz that cut right through the Portuguese morning light. I turned the screen over. Darius. My thumb drifted toward decline. We had exchanged exactly one communication since the parking lot, a short text from me confirming I had touched down safely. He had not written back, so why now? Why punch through the first real quiet I had found in 40 years? I am a logical man, and logic is clear on this. You collect data before you act. Against every instinct, I answered. Hello, Darius, I said. My own voice surprised me lower and more settled than he likely recalled. Dad, is that you? The signal was clean, but his tone was hurried, almost thin. No warmth, no greeting. No happy birthday, And I had just turned 75 last week. Yes, it is me. Is something wrong? No, everything is incredible, actually. He said, words running together. Behind him, I could make out the clink of crystal and the low hum of a room full of people. We are at the country club. Garrison just treated the whole members' lounge to a round of drinks. I said nothing and held the silence open until he had to walk into it. Anyway, Dad, the reason I am calling Mom wanted you to hear it from me. It is settled. The wedding is next month. I shifted my gaze out toward the river. A small sailboat was working hard against the current. Next month, I said. The ink on the divorce has barely been dry 6 months. That is a compressed timeline. It is a whirlwind romance. Darius shot back a defensive edge, sharpening his voice. When you know. Garrison is not someone who sits around deliberating. He acts unlike, well, you know what I mean. I shut my eyes. The dig traveled the full 4,000 miles without losing any force. Not because I envied Garrison, but because watching my son chase that kind of glittering fool's gold was its own kind of hurt. They have booked the Rittenhouse Grand Ballroom. Darius pressed on, warming to the brag. 500 guests, crab flown in from Maryland. It is shaping up to be the event of the decade. Mom is going to look like royalty. That is a steep price tag, I said, keeping my voice flat. I hope there is a solid prenup somewhere in that arrangement. A pause, some rustling, and then the phone changed hands. Give me that, a woman's voice hissed off mic. Then, hello, Clifford? Brianna? My daughter-in-law? The same woman who had once pushed away a slice of my birthday cake and announced loudly that store-bought was beneath her. Her voice now was soaked in the particular kind of artificial warmth that corrodes faster than acid. We just wanted to be certain the message landed properly. We will send an invitation protocol, but in all honesty, there is no obligation for you to attend. I pressed the phone harder against my ear. I beg your pardon. Let us be adults about this. She gave a short laugh, the kind that scrapes across the nerves. Flying from Europe is not cheap, especially on a fixed income. We do not want money to be a source of stress for you. Besides, Garrison's guest list runs to senators, CEOs, Forbes names. Showing up in one of your old suits, we just think it could be uncomfortable. For everyone. I glanced down at what I was wearing. Egyptian cotton cut by a tailor in Porto who had fitted diplomats and heads of state. But a label reader like Brianna would never see past the absence of a logo. So this call is an uninvitation, I said, keeping every syllable level. This call is mercy, she corrected briskly. And full disclosure, you have been replaced. Garrison will stand beside Darius at his vow renewal next year. He will be the grandfather figure for our children when they come. He is the patriarch of this family now. We felt you deserved advance notice, so there are no surprises. She did not pause for a reply. There was one more laugh, brittle and too high, and then the line dropped. I set the phone on the table with care. Sun still pouring down. River still running. But the air around me had shed about 10 degrees. Replaced. Embarrassment. Fixed income. I turned those words over one by one the way you turn a component in your hand before you test it. I sat with that conversation for a good while, filtering out the noise, the showing off, the posturing, the small cruelties, and hunting for the actual signal underneath. That is what engineers do. Noise is a distraction. The signal is the truth. And Brianna and Darius had been generating enormous noise, which raised one question. Why? Genuinely content, people do not place international calls to inform you how irrelevant you are. If Garrison was truly the Titan, they described what did it cost them to let me sit undisturbed in Portugal. The very fact of the call, and the fact that it was designed to keep me away, told me something important. I tapped the table. Once, twice, 3 times. Fear. Buried in all that bluster, the actual signal was fear. Brianna's laugh had been a note too sharp. Darius's praise of Garrison was pitched at a frequency that sounded more like a man reassuring himself. And then a thought arrived, cold and precise, that straightened my spine. Garrison, the venture capitalist who had emerged from nowhere. The man burning through money as if the supply were infinite. I thought about the house Nadine had taken in the settlement, the joint accounts she had drained clean. And then a detail surfaced from the divorce proceedings, minor enough that no one would have flagged it: a safety deposit box at the downtown bank, listed in my name, though I had given Nadine access years back. I had presumed she emptied it with everything else. But what if the box was still sealed? And then the sharper memory, a mechanic's lien. I had registered it against the deed of our old house 20 years ago when I rewired the entire property to industrial-grade standards, a legal buffer against any business lawsuit. I had never gone back to discharge it. If Garrison was trying to borrow against that house to refinance it and fund this spectacle of a wedding, that lien would surface in the title search. Clearing it required my wet signature. No one had contacted me for that signature, which left exactly 2 possibilities: they had not found it yet, or someone had signed my name without my permission. "You don't need to come," Brianna had told me. "We don't want you to make a scene." They were not worried about my bank balance. They were worried about my presence. I pushed back from the table and stood. The quiet mornings, the fresh cod at the market, the long, slow naps, all of that would keep. There was a fault in the circuit, and if left alone, it was going to ignite something I still cared about deeply: my name and the legacy attached to it. I was not prepared to watch my son, however reckless, walk blindly into the blaze. Or perhaps, if I am being straight with myself, I simply had to stand close enough to feel the heat before I would truly believe it. I pulled up the airline app. Brianna had pictured me counting coins to scrape together a fare. I moved past economy without slowing. I moved past business class. I reserved a first-class suite on the earliest flight out to Philadelphia International Airport. Not going back for cake. Going back to read the wiring, because every instinct I had said the gleaming life Nadine was assembling was carrying a hidden overload, and I planned to be the one holding the switch when it gave way. "One-way ticket," I said quietly to no one but the open terrace. Then I went inside to pack. I laid out my finest suit, the slate blue one, the one that fits like a second skin and carries like armor. They had wished for a ghost. They were about to discover what a haunting actually feels like. Philadelphia International Airport has its own signature industrial cleaner jet fuel and the low-grade dread of 10,000 tight connections. For 40 years, breathing that air meant I was clocking in a blown transformer in Terminal 3 conveyor belts in baggage claim, seized up for the 100th time. But stepping off the flight from Porto today, the smell carried a completely different meaning. The place had the charge of a battlefield in it. I stepped through the automatic doors of the International Arrivals Terminal, not as the same stooped, hollowed-out man who'd flown out 6 months prior, but as Clifford Hawn, someone who'd spent his mornings cutting through Atlantic swells and his afternoons turning the pages of philosophy books. My slate blue suit sat perfectly across my shoulders. 20 pounds of stress had simply fallen away. My beard was clean and sharp. I didn't carry the look of a man who'd been wronged. I carried the look of a man who answered to nobody but himself. I was rolling my leather carry-on toward the taxi stand when a commotion near the VIP pickup zone pulled at my attention. Under normal circumstances, I'd have kept walking. Noise is just inefficiency bleeding out of a broken system. But then a voice reached me, one I knew more intimately than my own pulse. a voice that once breathed goodnight against my ear, but in its final chapter had only ever catalogued my failures. Nadine. I stepped back behind a concrete pillar, a cluster of tourists squabbling over a map shielding me from view. I settled my sunglasses in place. I needed to read the enemy's position before she could read mine. There she was, my ex-wife. Standing at the turb, 3 oversized suitcases around her, all of them looking fresh out of the packaging. She had a white fur coat on, despite it being October. She looked rattled, compact mirror open every few seconds, smoothing her hair, straightening her diamond earrings. She looked like a woman working overtime to persuade the world she was doing just fine. Then the cavalcade rolled in. Not a car, a production. 3 black SUVs bracketing a gleaming pearl-white Rolls-Royce Ghost. They pulled to a stop with the kind of theatrical screech that serves no purpose except spectacle. A uniformed driver leapt out to swing open the rear door, and out stepped Garrison. He matched his social media photos exactly. Tan cranked a shade too high teeth, an almost painful white a suit that likely cost more than my first house. He threw his arms open to no one in particular, performing for an empty audience. "My queen," he thundered. His voice bounced off the concrete overhang above. "Philadelphia is not the same without its brightest star." Nadine shrieked like a teenager and flung herself into his arms. I watched the embrace. It had the stiffness of a scene that had been blocked and rehearsed. It looked like a soap opera kept on air long after the ratings had given up on it. Darius was there too, climbing out of one of the SUVs, slapping hands with the drivers, carrying himself like he was part of a presidential detail. Bystanders slowed and stared, leaning toward each other. Who is that? Is he in movies? Is he a billionaire? I was staring too, but not at the fur coat or the gleaming teeth. My eyes had gone to the car. More precisely, to the rear bumper of the pearl-white Rolls-Royce Ghost. To anyone passing by, it read, "As pure unlimited wealth, a machine north of $200,000. But I am not anyone passing by. I am a master electrician who spent 40 years inside the garages of Philadelphia's elite and Philadelphia's pretenders. My gaze settled on the license plate frame. Discreet black chrome, but I caught the logo pressed into the lower corner. A small, stylized crown, and beneath it the letters P. Prestige Motorworks. A cold smirk moved across my mouth. Prestige Motorworks wasn't a dealership. It was a high-end rental agency on the South Side. I knew the place well. I had rewired their entire security system 3 years back after a string of thefts. I knew their fleet. I knew their pricing. And I knew their bread and butter was renting luxury vehicles to music video crews and social media personalities who needed to look wealthy for precisely 24 hours. Men who actually own things don't pick up their fiancés in rental frames. Real wealth travels with private plates or personal drivers. Garrison Wolf, venture capitalist, alleged reshaper of economies, was collecting his bride-to-be in a car that ran $100 or $200 a day. I watched the driver wrestle Nadine's bags into the trunk. The lid didn't drop on its own. He had to press it firmly shut. Hydraulic latch going out, a maintenance item Prestige Motorworks hadn't gotten around to. Garrison wasn't buying the world at all. He was leasing it one day at a time. As the convoy peeled off, tires barking, trailing exhaust, I finally stepped out of cover and walked to the taxi queue. My mind already moving. A rental car isn't evidence of anything by itself. Maybe his own vehicle was being serviced. Maybe he liked the change. But stacked on top of Darius's desperate phone call, it was a red flag the size of a highway billboard. "Driver me," I said, settling into the back of a yellow cab, Liberty Federal Bank on Dearborn Street. I didn't stop at the hotel. I didn't stop to eat. I went straight to where the money lived. Liberty Federal was a cathedral, marble floors, brass fixtures, 30 years of my deposits in its ledgers. I had brought them my first apprentice paycheck. I had signed the mortgage papers on the house Nadine now called hers within these same walls. The air conditioning met my face as I walked through the door. The security guard at the desk, old Mike, looked up. His expression shifted the moment he placed me. "Mr. Hahn, is that really you? Something's different about you. Man, you look a solid 10 years younger." "Turns out travel agrees with me, Mike," I said, shaking his hand. "Is Leonard in... Mr. Cho?" "He's in his office right now. Head on back, he's been asking after you." I knocked on the heavy oak door. Leonard Cho, a man I'd lined up next to on a high school football field, glanced up from his monitor and set down his pen. He came around the desk and wrapped his arms around me. "I figured you were gone for good. You look like you bought the sun outright." I took the leather chair across from him and skipped the pleasantries. "I'm an engineer by nature. I locate the fault, and then I fix it. Leonard, I need to look at my file, and I need to ask you something about the property." Leonard's smile eased off his face. He settled back into his chair, his manner moving through friendly, then professional, and landing somewhere that looked a great deal like worry. He tapped at his keyboard. "I'm guessing this is about the recent activity," he said quietly. "What activity?" I asked. "The divorce decree gave Nadine the house. My name's off the title, I know that. I signed the quitclaim deed." "You did," Leonard said, angling the monitor my way. "Your name is off the title, but it still appears in the original lien history, so I get flagged on significant changes. Clifford, 2 weeks ago, Nadine refinanced the house. I came forward in my seat. Refinanced. She should own it outright. I cleared that mortgage 5 years ago. She took out a home equity line of credit." Leonard said, his finger landing on a figure on the screen. "A substantial one. She pulled out 80% of the appraised value." He paused. "That's $600,000, Clifford. In cash." Silence pressed into the room. The server in the corner hummed and seemed to get louder. $600,000. That was the foundation I had poured for her security. That was the roof she slept under. "Why?" I asked. "What does she need that kind of liquidity for? She walked away with half my savings." "She has the alimony." Leonard hesitated. He glanced toward the closed door. "She came in with him, Clifford. That man Wolf. He did all the talking. The loan officer, who was, I'll say, quite taken with him, barely got a word in. He said he needed bridge capital for a unicorn investment opportunity." The buzzwords came fast. Blockchain AI integration. He told her he was bringing Nadine in at the ground floor because he loved her. Said he'd triple her money inside 3 months. Something cold and tight moved through my gut. It wasn't anger exactly. It was the nauseating sensation of watching a structure fail in real time, like seeing a building shudder because someone quietly knocked out a load-bearing wall. "No, he's a billionaire, Leonard." I said, the irony sitting heavy in my voice. "Why does a billionaire go to his fiancée's house equity for bridge capital?" "Exactly," Leonard said, nearly a whisper. "We ran a soft check standard procedure. Clifford, the man, is a ghost. He has credit cards, yes, an LLC registered in Delaware. But he doesn't hold accounts at any of the major banks in Philadelphia. His wealth appears entirely liquid and in constant motion." He stopped. "But Nadine signed the papers. She was looking at him like he'd hung the stars. She wired the funds to his LLC account the same day." I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. The rental Rolls-Royce ghost. Darius's desperate call warning me to stay away. $600,000 drawn out of that house like marrow pulled clean from a bone. This was not simply a bad marriage spiraling to its conclusion. This was a harvest. Garrison Wolf wasn't taking a wife. He was liquidating her asset by asset, and Darius, my foolish, greedy son, was probably next in the queue to be picked clean. "Does Darius know?" I asked. Leonard shook his head. Darius had co-signed as a witness. He was already talking about buying a Lamborghini with his cut of the profits. I got to my feet. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer scale of the foolishness I was looking at. They had called me a failure. They had called me cheap. And the whole time they were handing the keys to the kingdom to a man who couldn't even claim the car he arrived in. "Thank you, Leonard," I said, fastening my jacket. Clifford, what are you planning to do?" Leonard asked, rising from his chair. "It's legal. She signed voluntarily. There's nothing to be done to stop it." I moved to the door and glanced back. The old Clifford would have sprinted to her house, pleaded with her to stop, raised his voice until she heard him. The old Clifford would have tried to pull her back from the edge, but the old Clifford was gone. He died in that parking lot the day she threw a transit card with $15 on it at him. "I'm not going to stop it, Leonard," I said, my voice flat and even. "I'm just going to make sure that when the lights go out, I am the only one holding a flashlight." I walked out of the bank and into the Philadelphia wind. It cut right through my suit, but I didn't feel a thing. I had a wedding to prepare for, and I needed to guarantee myself a front-row seat for when the bill finally came due. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Brianna. "Reminder, the rehearsal dinner is wedding party only. Don't embarrass us by showing up." I read it and typed back, "Understood. I'll just be a spectator." I hit send. A spectator. Yes, that was precisely what I intended to be. A spectator at an execution. But first, one more stop. I needed to visit the one place Garrison Wolf would never expect me to go. The rental agency. Because if I knew Prestige Motorworks, they kept thorough records on every driver. And more importantly, whose credit card was actually sitting in their system. I raised my hand for a cab. The game had just shifted. They were playing checkers with money they didn't have. I was about to play chess with the truth. And the truth, as 74 years of living had taught me, is the one asset that never loses its value. The Copper Pavilion is the kind of restaurant where the lighting is kept deliberately low. The menus carry no prices, and the waitstaff look at you sideways if you dare ask about the soup. It is a monument to excess planted in the heart of Philadelphia, a place people visit not to eat, but to be witnessed eating. I arrived 5 minutes late. I had spent the afternoon at a coffee shop across the street from my ex-wife's house, watching a moving truck carry off the last of the furniture I had built with my own 2 hands. Now I was ready to sit across from the people spending the proceeds. The maitre d' young man, with lacquered hair and a sneer he'd clearly rehearsed in a mirror, moved to intercept me. "Do you have a reservation, sir?" He asked, his gaze traveling over my suit, hunting for grounds to turn me away. "I'm with the Wolf Party," I said, my voice steady and unhurried. His bearing shifted immediately. "Ah, the VIP room right this way." He walked me through the main dining room past tables occupied by politicians and athletes to a semi-private alcove at the back. They were already there. Nadine blazing like a disco ball in a sequin dress cut too young for her by a decade. Darius working quietly on a scotch, his nerves showing. Brianna, her eyes fixed on her phone, sealed off from the room entirely. And Garrison. Garrison was at the head of the table, both arms draped along the top of the leather booth, occupying the space the way a silverback stakes out territory. When he clocked me, his smile came up short of his eyes. It was a predator's smile. "Clifford," he said, rising halfway without ever extending a hand. "We weren't sure you'd actually make it. Figured the flight might be a bit much for you." I pulled out the vacant chair across from him. "I'm perfectly fine, Garrison. I made it through 40 Philadelphia winters on power lines in the open air. A first-class seat is hardly an ordeal. Brianna looked up from her phone. Her eyes moved over my slate blue suit, the one I had commissioned from the tailor in Porto who cuts for Portuguese diplomats. She curled her lip. "Is that what you're wearing to the wedding, Clifford?" she asked, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry to the next table. "It looks a little boxy. Did you find it at a discount outlet? We envisioned a black tie affair. We can't have you looking like the hired help." I smoothed the lapel. Super 150's wool, soft as a whisper against the hand. It cost more than her first car. "It's custom-made," I said quietly. "In Europe, the preference is fit over flash." She rolled her eyes. "Europe, please. You probably found it in a tourist market." She turned toward Garrison. "Garrison's wearing Tom Ford. That's what success actually looks like." Nadine laid a hand on Garrison's arm, planting her flag. "Don't be unkind, Brianna. Clifford does the best he can with what he has. He's always been careful with money." Garrison laughed. "Let's get the man something to drink. Waiter!" A sommelier materialized at his elbow, leather wine list in hand. "Bring us the Chateau Latour 1997. Garrison said, not bothering to glance at the list. "And a tasting glass for my friend here." He aimed a thick finger in my direction. "Clifford, I want you to try this. You probably drink the boxed stuff, right? Maybe beer. This will do your palate some good. It's a $2,000 bottle. Try not to just knock it back." The table went quiet. Darius stared down at his plate. He knew I'd never touched boxed wine. He knew I'd built a modest wine cellar in our basement years ago, before Nadine had commandeered the space for shoes. The sommelier tipped a measure of dark red into a glass and set it in front of me. Garrison watched with amusement, waiting for the gratitude he expected. I lifted the glass, gave it a slow swirl, held it up to what little light there was. The color was already reading wrong, too brown at the rim for a 98. I brought it to my nose. Cork. The wine had turned. It smelled of wet cardboard and vinegar. I looked across at Garrison. He was beaming, waiting to be praised. "Well?" he asked. "Can you taste the oak? The depth?" I set the glass down. "It's certainly distinctive," I said, choosing my words with care. "A very bold aroma. I think it suits you perfectly, Garrison." The insult sailed right past him. He laughed and brought his palms together. "Pour it for everyone, we're celebrating." "Celebrating what?" I asked. Garrison leaned his elbows onto the table. "The future, Clifford. My future. Our future. I just closed a seed round for my tech startup. We're going to transform how people buy groceries on the blockchain. And Darius here is going to be my vice president of operations." I looked at my son. "Darius, you're walking away from the logistics firm. That's a union position with full benefits." Darius finally met my eyes. Defiant, but his hands weren't steady. "Dad, stop living in another era. Unions are for people who've given up. Garrison is giving me equity stock options. When the company goes public in 2 years, I'll be worth $10 million. And what does your salary look like between now and then?" I asked. Darius paused. "We're drawing a nominal salary to protect the growth runway. But Garrison is covering my expenses. He's taking care of everything." I looked at Nadine. She was nodding along eagerly. "He's so generous, Clifford. He paid off Darius's student loans just last week." "Did you see the receipt?" I asked her. "Or did he tell you he did it?" "Clifford," Nadine snapped, "why do you have to drain the joy out of everything? Can't you just be glad that our son finally has a father figure who actually knows how to win?" The words hung in the air like smoke. A father figure. Darius cleared his throat. He reached into his jacket pocket and came out with a small velvet box. He didn't open it. He just held it there. Actually, Dad, there's something I need to tell you, Darius said. Go on, son, Garrison said warmly, settling back and bringing the ruined wine to his lips. He flinched slightly, but said nothing too proud to let on that he'd ordered a $2,000 glass of vinegar. Darius drew a breath. Dad, about the wedding. We talked it over, and normally the father of the groom stands beside the groom, but what? I asked, my voice going quiet. But Garrison is the one who made this wedding happen. Darius said the words, spilling out. He paid for the venue. He paid for the honeymoon. He's been more of a father to me in 6 months than you were in 30 years. You taught me to save pennies. He taught me how to make millions. Darius glanced toward Garrison, seeking the approval he'd already surrendered himself to. So, Darius went on. I asked Garrison to be my best man and to stand in the father's place at the ceremony. He'll give the toast. He'll sign the registry. And where do I stand? I asked. Brianna cut in her smile, carrying a mean edge. You're a guest, Clifford. We've got a table for you near the back, next to Great Aunt Cecile, the deaf one. We didn't want you feeling any pressure to speak. We know public speaking isn't exactly your strong suit. I looked at the four of them. My ex-wife, who had traded our shared history for a rental car ride. My daughter-in-law, who measured a person's value in social media metrics. My son, who was bartering his own dignity for stock options in a company built on air. And Garrison, the engineer of this whole disaster, sipping bad wine and mistaking it for something fine. A strange feeling settled in my chest. Not pain. Relief. The last thread holding me had snapped. I was free. I rose slowly from my seat. I fastened my jacket. I understand, I said. Garrison laughed. No hard feelings, old sport. It's just business evolution, survival of the fittest. I picked up my water glass. To the groom eyes on Darius, I said, May your equity be as real as your loyalty. I turned to Garrison. I hope your wallet is as thick as your mouth, Garrison, because carrying this family is heavier than it looks. Garrison's smile slipped for just a moment. What's that supposed to mean? It means enjoy the, I said. I've got an early flight to catch. Or at least that's what I was telling myself. I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. I could feel their stares following me. I could hear Brianna whispering, God, he's so bitter. I moved past the open kitchen, past the wine cellar, and stopped at the host stand near the front door. I waited. I wasn't quite ready to leave. I made a show of checking my coat, lingering in the shadows of the foyer. Through the glass partition, I watched the waiter approach their table, carrying the bill in a black leather folder. Garrison snatched it up with a flourish, not bothering to glance at the total. He fished out a black metal credit card and flipped it onto the tray, like he was dealing cards. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. The waiter carried it to the terminal at the side station. He swiped the card. He frowned. He cleaned the strip on his apron and swiped again. He tapped the screen. He walked back to the table. He leaned in and murmured something to Garrison. Garrison laughed it off with a wave, said something that read like, "Run it again." The waiter returned to the terminal, swiped once more. Then he lifted the phone beside the register. He spoke briefly, set it down, and came back to the table, this time without the folder. I watched Garrison's expression shift. A deep flush climbed from his collar up to his hairline. He patted his jacket pockets. He produced another card, a blue one. He handed it to the waiter. The waiter went back to the terminal. Swipe. Pause. Headshake. I saw Nadine reach into her purse. She offered a card, but Garrison stopped her, caught her by the wrist. Now he was arguing with the waiter outright. His gestures were getting wilder by the second. He jabbed a finger at his suit at the table, clearly performing the classic, "Do you know who I am?" routine. The manager began crossing the room. That was enough for me. The first crack in the dam. The water was beginning to seep through. I pushed open the heavy front door and stepped out into the cool Philadelphia night. The air tasted sweet. "Hey, buddy?" A valet called over, "Need your car?" "No," I said, waving down a passing cab. "I don't have a car. I've got a transit card with $15 on it, and right now it's the most valuable thing I own because it's paid for." As the taxi pulled away, I glanced back at the restaurant. Through the window, I could see Garrison on his feet, face burning red, while Darius frantically turned out his own empty pockets. The dinner was on them, but the real bill was coming tomorrow, and the interest rate was going to be punishing. The wind off the Delaware in October hits you like something personal. But out on the deck of the yacht, Garrison had chartered the cold, was the only honest thing present. The vessel was the Silver Wake, 120 feet of fiberglass, and ego riding the dark water. Impressive, I'll give it that. Waiters in white tuxedos moved through the crowd with trays of caviar that looked like buckshot, and a string quartet played softly in the corner, waging a quiet, losing war against the wind. I stood at the railing, nursing a glass of sparkling water. I watched the city skyline drift past the lights of Philadelphia, shimmering like faraway stars. It was the city I had helped power grid by grid, wire by wire. Now I felt like an outsider drifting along its edge. Brianna had made my position clear, tolerated, not welcomed. She'd put me at a small high top, near the stern, away from the heat lamps and the VIP cluster. But from my spot in the shadows, I had sight lines to everything. I was the safety inspector surveying a structure days from condemnation. The gravitational center, as always, was Garrison. He was holding court up near the bow, ringed by men who wore hunger on their faces. Not hunger for food, for the kind of effortless money that hollows people out. Darius was right beside him, practically trembling with excitement. My son looked like a boy who'd just been let into the adults' room for the first time, not yet realizing he was the evening's main course. I drifted closer, keeping to the crowd's outer edge. I wanted to hear the pitch. "Gentlemen," Garrison's voice cut over the wind, full and assured. "The banking system is a dinosaur. It's slow. It's regulated by people invested in keeping you exactly where you are. What I'm offering isn't just an investment. It's an exit from the matrix." He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen. A graph appeared, a jagged green line rocketing toward infinity. "We call it Liberty Coin," Garrison said, eyes catching the light. "Backed by lithium deposits in South America that my firm holds exclusive rights to. We're projecting 300% returns in the first quarter, and that's the conservative number." I watched Darius's face. He was fixed on that phone screen, a blend of awe and pure greed written across him. He wasn't asking about mining permits. He wasn't asking about blockchain auditing. He was watching imaginary zeros stack up in his head. "I'm in," said one of the guests. A man I placed as a local car dealership owner. "Put me down for 50. $50,000. Garrison laughed, dismissive. "Solid entry point, Mike, but the real tier opens at 200. That's where the founder's equity lives." "I'll do 200, Darius blurted. My heart stopped. $200,000, everything. The money from the house refinance. The money Nadine would need to survive on when this whole structure folded. Garrison clamped a hand on Darius's shoulder and squeezed. "That's my boy. That's vision. You see, gentlemen, this young man gets it. He understands what's coming. He's not afraid to pull the trigger." I wanted to step forward. I wanted to grab Darius by the lapels and rattle him until the spell broke. I wanted to shout that lithium rights are public record, and if Garrison genuinely held them, he wouldn't be pitching to car dealers on a charter boat in Philadelphia. He'd be on Wall Street. But I knew Darius wouldn't hear it. He was drunk on closeness to power. To step in now would only cast me as the villain in their story of triumph. Then the sliding glass doors of the main cabin opened, and Nadine stepped out. If Garrison was the king of this delusion, Nadine was its queen. She wore a silver gown that followed curves maintained through costly procedures. But what the light went to wasn't the dress. It was the necklace, a cascading fall of diamonds that wrapped her throat and spilled toward her chest. Massive, ostentatious, an easy 50 carats. Garrison broke away from his circle of men and went to her, taking her hand, pressing his lips to it. "And here," he announced, "is the inspiration for all of it. My beautiful bride, wearing the Wolf family diamonds. These stones have lived in my vault for generations." The crowd rippled with admiration. Brianna rushed over, phone raised and flashing in the dark. "Oh my God, Nadine, you look like actual royalty!" Brianna squealed. "Those are insane." Nadine touched the stones at her throat, her face lit with pride. She scanned the deck and found me in the shadows. She lifted her chin, a gesture of pure defiance. "See what I have," her eyes said. "See what you could never give me." I moved a step closer. The engineer in me took the wheel. I have this habit, a compulsion really, to understand how things are constructed. Years back for our 30th anniversary, I had put money aside for 3 years to buy Nadine an emerald pendant. It wasn't large, but it was flawless. I spent weeks with a gemologist, learning about clarity cut and refractive index. I learned how light behaves when it passes through a dense stone. I learned that a real diamond handles light in a very specific way. It manages light with a kind of dignity. It flashes gray and white with quiet fires of orange or blue underneath. I narrowed my eyes and studied the necklace as Nadine moved beneath the deck lights. The stones were catching the light, but catching far too much of it. They were throwing off a disco ball scatter of reds, greens, purples, a chaotic burst of color in every direction. That is called double refraction. Diamonds are singly refractive. They don't fracture light that way. Moissanite does. Cubic zirconia does. High-grade lead glass does. A cold smile settled on my lips. The Wolf family diamond stones that had lived in his vault for generations. It was a lie. A physical, provable lie hanging right around my ex-wife's throat. If the diamonds were fake, the lithium mines were fake, the coin was fake, the man was fake. I looked at Garrison. He was soaking up the admiration, his arm looped around Nadine's waist. He looked untouchable, but I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip despite the biting wind. I saw how his eyes kept moving around the perimeter, always scanning, always checking the exits. He wasn't a billionaire unwinding on his yacht. He was a man on the run, hiding inside a performance. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't lift it high. I held it at chest level as though I was checking a message. "Hey, Garrison." I called out, my voice cutting through the noise around us. He looked over, irritation crossing his face. "What is it, Clifford?" "I just wanted to say..." I went on, stepping into the light. "What a magnificent setting. Reminds me of the pieces they move on the Miracle Mile." Garrison went rigid, his smile locked in place. For a fraction of a second, the mask came down. He understood that I understood. He could read the calculation sitting in my eyes. "Thank you, Clifford," he said, clipping each word. Now if you'll excuse us." He steered Nadine away, putting his body between her and me, shielding the lie from the one person on that boat who knew what to do with a jeweler's loop. But it was already too late. I had the shot. I looked down at my screen. The image was sharp. Garrison's face was lit up clearly by the deck lights. I opened my encrypted messaging app and scrolled to a contact saved as Gideon the Shark. Gideon was an old friend from the neighborhood we used to play chess in the park on Sunday afternoons. Gideon was also a senior fraud investigator for one of the largest insurance underwriters in the Midwest. He spent his working life tracking people who faked their own deaths or torched their own warehouses. He had a database the FBI would envy. I attached the photo. I typed a short message. Gideon, do me a favor, run facial recognition on this guy. Goes by Garrison Wolf, claims to be VC. I think he's wearing glass and selling fog. Let me know what comes up. I pressed send. The small circle spun, then became a check mark. Sent. I looked up. Darius was shaking hands with Garrison, sealing the $200,000 deal. Nadine was laughing one hand at her fake diamonds, with no idea that she was wearing a symbol of her own coming ruin. I finished my sparkling water. It tasted flat. My part was done. I had gathered the data. Now I just needed to wait for the results from the lab. As I headed toward the gangplank to leave the party early, Brianna stepped into my path. She had a champagne flute in one hand and a smirk on her face. "Leaving already, Clifford?" she asked. "Must be hard watching what a real provider looks like." I looked at her. I looked at the yacht that wasn't theirs. I looked at the jewelry that wasn't real. And I looked at the son I had lost to this illusion. "It's educational, Brianna," I said quietly. "I'm learning a great deal tonight." "About what? Being second best?" "No," I said, stepping around her. "About the cost of tuition." I walked down the ramp onto the solid concrete of the dock. The ground under my feet felt good, stable, real. Behind me, the yacht party carried on, a floating bubble of lies drifting on a dark, cold river. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A reply from Gideon. "On it. Give me 24 hours. If he's who I think he is, you're going to want to stay clear of the blast radius." I buttoned my coat against the wind. I wasn't going to stay clear. I was going to be standing at the center of it. Because when this bomb went off, I needed to make sure the debris didn't bury the only thing I still had left to protect my own dignity. The countdown had started. It was 11:00 at night when the knock came. Not a polite tap. A rhythmic, impatient pounding that rattled the heavy door of my hotel room. I had been sitting in the armchair by the window, working through a report on industrial surplus value, trying to push out the image of my ex-wife wearing a necklace made of glass. I knew who was on the other side of that door before I touched the handle. Desperation has a specific cadence, and my son Darius had been broadcasting it for 2 days straight. I opened the door. Darius stood in the hallway under the yellow fluorescent light. He looked wrecked. His tie was loose, hanging sideways like a noose he hadn't managed to finish. His eyes were bloodshot, a film of sweat across his forehead, despite the air-conditioned chill of the corridor. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask if I was in the middle of something. He just pushed past me into the room, bringing with him the smell of stale scotch and expensive cologne. I closed the door quietly. I watched him pace the strip of carpet between the bed and the desk, vibrating with nervous energy, his hands opening and clenching at his sides. "You want some water, Darius?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "You look dehydrated." "I don't need your water, Dad," he snapped, spinning to face me. "I need you to be reasonable. Just once in your life, I need you to stop being a roadblock and start acting like we're on the same team." I walked to the minibar and poured a glass of water anyway. I set it on the desk. "I'm always reasonable," I said. "That's what it means to be an engineer." Reason is the thing that keeps buildings from falling down. What's the emergency, son? Darius reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a document folded in thirds. It had clearly been handled hard. He smoothed it out across the desk with jerky, unsteady movements. "It's the trust," he said. "The education fund you set up for the grandkids." I looked at the paper. It was the deed to the Hahn family trust. It wasn't a fortune. It was $50,000 that I had scraped together over 20 years. Every holiday shift, every double in a freezing basement, $100 went into that account. It was there to make sure that if Darius ever had children, they wouldn't have to begin at zero the way I had. "What about it?" I asked. "It's sitting in a conservative bond index. It's safe." "That's the problem," Darius said, throwing his hands up. "It's safe. It's stagnant. It's returning 3% a year, Dad. 3%. Inflation is eating it alive." "And let me guess," I said, leaning against the wall. "Garrison has a better idea." Darius's eyes lit with that same fanatical gleam I'd seen aboard the yacht. "Yes." Garrison looked at the portfolio. He laughed, Dad. He actually laughed. He called it money under a mattress. He wants to move it into his liquidity pool. He can guarantee 15% monthly returns. He wants to manage it for us for free, because he cares about the family legacy. A sharp pain moved through my chest. Not a heart attack. It was the heartbreak of understanding that my son wasn't simply a victim. He was a willing partner in his own destruction. He was prepared to take the one pure thing I had built, a safety net for children not yet born, and hand it to a wolf. "So you came here to get me to sign over the trustee rights," I said. "I'm here to get you to sign the release," Darius corrected. "Garrison needs full authorization to move the principal tonight. The Tokyo market opens in 3 hours, and he wants the capital positioned before the morning bell." "And if I refuse?" I asked. Darius stopped pacing. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something genuinely dark move across his face. It was the look of a man who had torched so many bridges that jumping into the fire was the only direction left. "Don't make this ugly, Dad," he said, his voice dropping into something close to a threat. "Garrison has lawyers, serious lawyers. If you claim to be managing this money, but you're letting it stagnate, that's a breach of fiduciary duty. We can sue you. We can have you declared incompetent." Garrison said he could get a competency hearing on the calendar by Monday. "Do you want to spend your retirement fighting a legal battle you can't afford?" I stared at him. My own son was threatening to have me declared senile. He was prepared to drag my name through the dirt, to shred my reputation, all to put $50,000 in the hands of a con artist. I understood then that the boy I had raised was gone. The boy who used to cry over a scraped knee, who used to help me haul my toolbox up the stairs, he had been swallowed whole. What was standing in front of me now was an empty shell packed with another man's lies. "You'd actually do that?" I asked quietly. "You'd sue your own father?" Darius flinched for just a moment, but then the greed closed back over his face. "I'm doing what's best for the family," he said, reciting the lines. "I'm maximizing our assets. Just sign the paper, Dad. Stop being a dinosaur." I crossed to the desk. I looked at the document. It was a standard transfer of trusteeship, handing Darius full control over the principal effective immediately. If I signed it as written, the money would be gone before sunrise. Garrison would drain it, use it to cover the catering tab or the yacht rental, and my grandchildren would start with nothing. But if I refused, Darius would erupt. He would drag this out screaming and threatening. And honestly, I was exhausted, bone-tired of waging a war against people who were hell-bent on surrendering. But I am a master electrician. When you can't stop the current, you redirect it. You install a breaker. Okay, I said. I picked up the pen from the hotel desk. Darius exhaled a breath he'd been holding for some time. Thank God. Finally, you're making the right call. I set the tip of the pen to the paper, but I didn't sign at the bottom. Not yet. I'm going to add a small annotation, I said, keeping my tone casual. Just for my own records to show I acted in good faith. Whatever, Darius said, glancing at his watch. Just be quick. I located the clause governing disbursement of funds. In clean block letters, I crossed out immediate access and wrote in the margin funds to remain frozen in escrow until the named beneficiary reaches the age of 18 years. Transfer of management authorized only under these conditions. It was a restrictive covenant. It meant that even if Darius became trustee, he couldn't touch the principal. He could move it into Garrison's fund if he liked, but the bank would never release the cash. It would just sit there locked tight until a child who didn't yet exist came of age. I signed my name at the bottom with a full flourish. There, I said. It's all yours. Darius snatched the paper from under my hand before the ink had fully dried. He didn't read it. He didn't even glance at the paragraph I had rewritten. All he saw was the signature at the bottom. That was the only thing he was after the win. About time, he muttered, folding the paper and jamming it back into his jacket pocket. Garrison is going to be pleased. This shows commitment. He turned toward the door. No thank you. No goodbye. He had what he came for. Darius, I said. He stopped his hand on the doorknob. What? Sir, I hope you read the fine print on everything Garrison hands you, I said. Because the devil is always in the details. He scoffed. Garrison doesn't do fine print. He operates on a handshake. That's how real business gets done. He pulled open the door and walked out, letting it slam shut behind him. I stood alone in the hotel room's silence. I moved to the window and looked down at the street below. I watched my son come out of the hotel entrance, throw himself into a waiting cab, and disappear into the night. He was rushing to deliver a locked box to a thief who didn't have the key. I felt a deep sadness, but no regret. I had protected the money. I had secured the future. But I had lost the present. My son was gone, driving toward a cliff, with his foot on the floor, certain he was learning how to fly. I went back to the armchair and picked up my report. The dossier from Gideon was waiting. I turned the page. Attached was a photocopied police report out of Florida dated 3 years ago. The mugshot was grainy, but the face was impossible to miss. It wasn't Garrison Wolfe. It was Dale Krupnick, arrested for selling fake timeshares to retirees. I looked at the date of the wedding, 2 days away. I took a sip of the water I had poured for Darius. It was cool and clean. Sleep well, son, I whispered to the empty room. You're going to need your rest, because when you wake up, the nightmare is going to be very, very real. The Rittenhouse Grand Ballroom had been turned into a botanical garden. It was a spectacle of excess that edged toward the obscene. Thousands of white orchids, almost certainly flown in from Thailand, that very morning cascaded from the ceiling like living waterfalls. The fragrance was so dense, it felt like walking into a perfume factory. A 20-piece symphony orchestra occupied a raised platform playing Mozart with a precision that cost $500 an hour per musician. Every inch of the room was engineered to project wealth. All of it was designed to broadcast one message. Look at us. Look at what we have. Look at how far we've come. But I am an engineer. I don't study the decoration. I study the structure. I looked at the floor and saw that the towering floral arrangements were blocking the fire exits. I looked at the lighting rig and saw cables taped down haphazardly, a lawsuit quietly waiting to be filed. And I looked at the people, my family, and saw a foundation already turning to dust. I stood at the entrance, holding my invitation. A young usher with a clipboard checked my name, looked up at me, then looked back down at his list. He hesitated. A flush of second-hand embarrassment crossed his face. "Mr. Hahn," he said softly. Right this way." He didn't take me to the front where family is seated. He didn't take me to the middle where friends and colleagues were finding their places. He walked me past the ice sculptures, past the chocolate fountains, past the rows of velvet chairs being held for the people Garrison was trying to impress. We kept going until we reached the back wall. "Here we are, sir," the usher murmured, eyes down. Table 42, the very last table in the room. It sat directly beside the swinging double doors of the kitchen, through which waiters streamed in and out, with loaded trays filling the air with a steady clatter of silverware and shouted orders. To my left was the entrance to the restrooms. Every time someone pushed through that door, a wave of industrial air freshener and plumbing drifted across our centerpiece. I sat down. My table mates were an assortment of ghosts from the past. There was Great-Aunt Cecile, 90 years old, convinced she was at a bingo hall. There was a second cousin from Nadine's side I hadn't seen in 15 years, who was already drunk. And there were 3 empty chairs. Even the other outcasts had decided against it. This was it. This was my place in their new world. Not just an ex-husband. I was refuse. Something to be tucked away near the toilets and the trash. I rested my hands on the tablecloth. It was silk. I did the math on this wedding in my head. The flowers, the venue, the orchestra, the food. It had to be north of $300,000. Half of the money Nadine had extracted from the house was already ash-burned up in a 6-hour party thrown in honor of a fraud. I poured myself a glass of water from the pitcher. I left the wine alone. I needed to think clearly. Then a sharp jolt rocked my chair. I looked up. Brianna was standing over me. She wore a bridesmaid dress that was cut too low and cost too much. Her face was layered in makeup, but none of it could conceal the ugliness of her expression. She had kicked the leg of my chair with her heel. "Oops," she said, her voice soaked in counterfeit innocence. "Didn't even notice you there, Clifford. You blend right in with the service staff." She leaned closer, her perfume muscling out the smell of the kitchen. "Hope you're comfortable," she murmured. "We thought this spot suited you. It's where the waste ends up. And that's what you are, isn't it, waste? You're the past we're flushing out." I looked at her. I looked at the young woman my son had married. I remembered when she first came into Darius's life. She had seemed warm back then, or perhaps she was simply better at hiding it. The mask was gone now. What I was looking at was a scavenger bird picking clean the bones of a kill it had no part in making. "You look lovely, Brianna," I said, keeping my voice level. "Enjoy the music. It didn't come cheap." She sneered. "Don't stress about the cost. Garrison has it handled. He's got more sitting in his couch cushions than you cleared in your entire career." She spun on her heel and strutted off, swinging her hips, hurrying back toward the cameras and the attention. I watched her go. What I felt was a strange kind of pity. She thought she was winning. She thought kicking an old man's chair gave her power. What she didn't know was that she was standing on a trap door, and I was holding the lever. I turned my attention to the front of the room. The ceremony was about to get underway. Garrison stood at the altar in a white tuxedo jacket with black lapels. He looked like a game show host from the 1970s. To everyone else in the room, he probably radiated confidence, smiling broadly, working the crowd, pressing flesh. But I put on my glasses. I focused. Garrison was unraveling. The ballroom was a crisp 68 degrees, yet beads of sweat were tracking down his forehead. His collar was already damp. He kept dragging his palms across his trousers, and his body refused to stay still. He shifted his weight foot to foot. He fussed with his tie. He fingered his cufflinks. But the clearest tell was the phone. Every 30 seconds, when he figured no one was watching, he would slide it from his jacket pocket, steal a glance at the screen, and push it back in. His face would tighten, a flash of pure dread behind his eyes gone just as quickly as the smile returned. I recognized that look. It's the look of a contractor who realizes he never installed the support beams and the concrete is already in the forms. He was waiting on something. A wire transfer, a confirmation, or maybe a warning. Darius stood right beside him, chest puffed out, beaming. My son was gazing at Garrison with total, unquestioning admiration. He didn't see the sweat. He didn't register the panic. He saw the white tuxedo and heard the promise of millions, and that was all he needed. The orchestra swelled. The wedding march rang out. The heavy double doors at the far end of the room opened wide. Every guest rose and turned to look. Nadine appeared. Her dress had to have cost $20,000, crystal-encrusted, with a tiara set on her head. She looked beautiful in a way, but there was something frightening in it too. Her smile was fixed, rigid. She moved down the aisle, gripping a bouquet of white roses so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. She passed my table without a glance. She didn't see the man who had loved her when she had nothing. She saw only the altar. She saw only the pot of gold waiting at the rainbow's end. As she reached the front, Garrison came down to meet her. He took both her hands. I watched him lean in and whisper something close to her ear. From across the room, it read as romance. The guests exhaled softly. Aunt Cecile, sitting beside me, clapped her hands and said, "Oh, true love." But I read lips. 40 years of calling out to crew members across thundering construction sites will do that for you. I watched Garrison's mouth move. He didn't say, "You look beautiful." He didn't say, "I love you." He said, "Did the wire clear yet?" Nadine's smile held perfectly, but her eyes went fractionally wider. She whispered back, "I don't know. I gave you the confirmation code." Garrison gave a quick, jerky nod. He patted her hand, but his gaze drifted straight back toward his jacket pocket, back to the phone hiding against his chest. I settled into my chair. The pieces were clicking into place. The rental car, the counterfeit diamonds, the desperate hunger for cash, and now this panic at the altar. Garrison wasn't just a con man. He was a con man whose scheme was caving in around him in real time. He needed Nadine's money not to invest, but to pay someone else off. The venue, the caterers, or maybe something far more dangerous than a loan officer. I scanned the room, 500 guests, senators, business owners, my own family. Every one of them was watching a fairy tale. I was the only one watching a heist. The officiant began. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." I reached inside my jacket. My fingers found the cool paper of the police report I had printed at the hotel business center. I felt the second envelope beneath it, the one holding Gideon's email with the facial recognition results. I wasn't going to stop this wedding. That would be too clean, too simple. I was going to let them say I do. I was going to let the knot get tied, because when you bring down a structure, you don't demolish it at the halfway point. You wait until it's fully committed to gravity, and then you pull the pin. I took a sip of water. It was warm. Go ahead, Garrison, I thought. Say the vows. Promise to love and to cherish, because the only thing you'll be cherishing tonight is the right to remain silent. Brianna glanced back from the front row and fixed me with a hard stare, making certain I knew my place. I lifted my glass to her and smiled. She had no idea. None of them did. The man sitting by the kitchen door and the restrooms was about to become the most consequential person in the room. The ceremony built toward its climax beneath the crystal chandeliers. The officiant, a man with a voice so deep and theatrical it sounded borrowed from a movie trailer, arrived at the question that seals a fate. Do you, Garrison Wolfe, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth? Garrison didn't answer right away. I watched his throat work as he swallowed. His eyes moved across the room, sweeping back and forth, searching the crowd, the way a man searches for the nearest fire exit. He drew a breath that shuddered on the way in. I do, he said. But he didn't stop there. He turned to Nadine and took both her hands. The sweat was plainly visible on his upper lip, now catching the stage lights. He needed to sell this. He needed to perform. Nadine, he declared, his voice carrying all the way to the back of the room where I sat beside the kitchen door. I don't just promise to be your husband. I promise to be your kingdom. I promise that from this day forward, you will never know want. You will never know limits. I will carry you to the heights of the world where you belong. You are not just marrying a man, you are marrying a destiny. The room caught its breath. Several women pressed handkerchiefs to their eyes. Aunt Cecile, who was halfway through a bread roll she'd smuggled in her purse, let out a long sigh. And isn't that something? The man speaks like a poet. I leaned back in my chair. He didn't speak like a poet. He spoke like a politician racing to get elected before the story breaks. I had listened to speeches like that before, from contractors who swore they'd finish under budget and ahead of schedule right before they vanished with the deposit. It was the language of overcompensation. When the foundation is crumbling, you paint the facade with gold. Nadine was drinking it in completely. She looked up at him with the kind of adoration that turned my stomach, not because I still loved her. That chapter had closed the moment she threw my keys on the pavement. It turned my stomach because I knew the price that look was going to carry. She believed him. She truly believed she'd finally won something. She had no idea she was clutching a ticket for a drawing that had already happened. I take you, Garrison, she sobbed into the microphone, to be my king. They moved to the rings. Garrison fumbled badly with the band. His hands were trembling so hard, he nearly dropped it. He laughed it off, a thin, high-pitched sound that had no business coming from a man with that voice. Just so excited, folks, he called out to the room. As he worked the ring onto her finger, I was scanning again. It's what I do. I look for the anomaly in the circuit, the one wire that's frayed, the single fuse running too hot. And then I found him. He was seated at table 1, the VIP table reserved for the groom's inner circle and most important business connections. He was the only one sitting there. A large man, broad across the shoulders, in a black suit that seemed to drink in the light around it. He wasn't watching the bride. He wasn't watching the groom. He was looking at his watch. He wore tinted glasses despite being indoors. He held a stillness that felt unnatural in a room full of people celebrating. When the couple kissed and the room exploded in applause, he didn't clap. He didn't smile. He simply reached for his water glass, took a slow sip, and set it back down in the same ring of condensation it had left before. Garrison pulled out of the kiss, throwing both arms up like a man who had just won something. The orchestra launched into a triumphant swell. The guests cheered, but Garrison's eyes didn't find his mother. They didn't go to Darius. They went directly to table 1. He looked at the man in the black suit. The man gave the smallest possible nod, not a nod of congratulations, the kind of nod a warden gives a prisoner. Recognition, supervision. Garrison's smile slipped for a beat. He quickly turned back to Nadine, pressing his face into her neck, hiding whatever was written on his face from the cameras. I knew right then that man was no guest. He was a variable one Garrison hadn't accounted for or perhaps one he was absolutely terrified of. The ceremony wrapped up. The guests began drifting out toward the terrace for the cocktail hour, while the ballroom was rearranged for dinner. The air buzzed with 500 people debating how moving the vows had been and guessing at the cost of the flowers. I got to my feet. My legs were stiff from the hard chair. I needed to know more. I worked my way through the crowd, moving like a ghost. Nobody stopped to speak with me. To everyone in that room, I was just the ex-husband, the failure, the relic of a former life. I was invisible. And invisibility, when you are gathering intelligence, is about the most useful thing you can be. I spotted the man in the black suit making his way toward the bar. He moved with a heavy, deliberate ease like a man who owned the floorboards under every step. I followed. The bar was packed, but the crowd seemed to part ahead of him on instinct, as though his presence alone lowered the temperature. He didn't order champagne. He didn't ask for a cocktail. "Soda water with a lime," he told the bartender. I slid into the open space beside him and ordered the same. "Nice ceremony," I said, keeping my eyes on the bottles lined up behind the bar. The man didn't look at me. He just turned the ice in his glass slowly. "If you like theater," he said. His voice was gravel, deep, rough, like tires grinding over loose stone. "Doesn't look like you're much of a fan," I observed. "I'm a fan of arithmetic," he replied, "and the math here doesn't add up." I turned to look at him. Up close, he was even more imposing. A scar ran clean through his left eyebrow. His suit was expensive Italian cut, but he wore it the way a man wears a uniform, not a fashion statement. "I'm Clifford," I said. I didn't reach for his hand. "I know who you are," he said. He turned his head at last. Behind the tinted lenses, I could feel him taking inventory of me. "The ex-husband. The electrician," I said, correcting him. "Master electrician." A small, humorless twitch moved across his lips. "Right. The man who got away." "Got away?" I asked. "You're the only person in this room who isn't drowning Clifford. You just haven't figured that out yet." He took a pull from his soda and glanced past my shoulder toward the terrace where Garrison was currently posing for photos, champagne raised high, laughing too loud, too hard. "Look at him," the man said quietly. "He looks like a man who just won the race, but he doesn't realize he's running on a treadmill." I decided to press. Apply voltage to the circuit and see what sparked. "You're at the VIP table," I said, "but you're not family and you're no friend. Garrison looked at you during the vows like he owed you his soul." The man gave a dry, dark chuckle. "Not his soul," he said. "Just his life, or at least the version of his life he's trying to sell to all these people." He turned his body fully toward me and removed his glasses. His eyes were gray cold and entirely without warmth. "I'm not a guest, Clifford. I'm the reason this circus is happening. I don't follow," I said, though I was beginning to. The man leaned in close. He smelled of expensive tobacco and mint. "Garrison Wolfe came to my organization 3 months ago. He needed bridge capital. He said he had a wealthy fiancé. He said he had a house he could leverage. He said he had a gullible stepson who would sign over a trust fund." My blood went cold. He knew about the house. He knew about Darius. He borrowed heavily. The man went on at rates that would make a bank manager physically ill. He told us he'd repay everything in full with interest the moment the wedding gifts were opened and the joint accounts were combined. He's using this wedding as a fundraising event. I looked out toward the terrace. Darius was out there laughing, working the room, shaking hands. Nadine was holding up her ring for someone to admire. They were cattle, well-fed, contented cattle with no idea that the man deciding their fate was sitting at the bar, nursing a soda water. And if he doesn't pay, I asked. The man slid his glasses back on. I'm the collection agency Clifford. We don't send overdue notices in the mail. He drained his glass in a single long pull and set it on the bar with a crack that cut through the noise of the room like a gunshot. Congratulations on your escape, he said. You may want to give yourself some distance when they cut the cake. Things are going to get messy. He turned and walked away, dissolving into the sea of tuxedos and gowns. I stood there holding my soda water, my hand trembling not from fear, but from fury. Garrison wasn't just a fraud. He was dangerous. He had walked organized crime directly into my family. He had used my son's future and my ex-wife's security as collateral on a debt he had no prayer of repaying. I looked at the happy couple on the terrace. Garrison was kissing Nadine again for the cameras. I understood in that moment that the police report sitting in my jacket wasn't merely a weapon. It was a mercy. If I didn't expose him, the man in the black suit would tear him apart, and Nadine and Darius would be caught in the wreckage. I set $5 on the bar. I straightened my tie. The reception was starting. The toasts were next. Darius was going to speak, Garrison was going to perform, and I was going to sit at my table beside the kitchen and the restrooms and wait. Because the man in black was right, I had escaped. But I couldn't walk out of the building yet. I had to watch it burn, if only to make certain the fire didn't jump to whatever innocent bystanders were still left. I went back to table 42. Aunt Cecile looked up at me with crumbs on her chin. "Who was that handsome man you were talking to?" she asked. "Just a banker, Aunt Cecile," I said, taking my seat. Just a banker, but I knew what he actually was. He was the repo man. He'd come to reclaim a life. Dinner service had just ended, and the waiters were sweeping away plates that still held half-eaten cuts of beef and discarded crab that had been flown in from Maryland. The waste of it turned my stomach, not because I'm tight with money, but because I understand the true weight of labor. I know how many hours a man must stand on a concrete floor to earn a meal like this. But here in this ballroom, built on borrowed money and stolen ambitions, waste was worn like a badge. It was evidence that they had so much they couldn't be bothered to care. The ballroom lights dimmed, shifting from a warm, amber glow down to a sharp, dramatic spotlight that sliced through the dark and fell on the head table. The room's chatter faded. The silverware went quiet. Darius rose to his feet. My son tugged at his tuxedo jacket and smoothed it down. He looked handsome, I'll give him that. He had my shoulders and his mother's smile. But as he accepted the microphone from the MC, I was looking at a stranger. His posture had gone arrogant, his chin tilted in a way that was a direct copy of Garrison's. He tapped the microphone twice. Thump, thump. The sound boomed through the speaker system. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and my new family." Darius began, his voice smooth and clearly rehearsed, the product of hours in front of a mirror. He let the pause stretch his eyes, sweeping across the VIP tables for effect. There is a moment coming that I still think about, when something I had been quietly carrying finally came into the open, and the people who thought they had the upper hand discovered just how wrong they were. Before we get there, tell me this. If you sensed someone close to you was working against you, would you confront them immediately? Or would you wait and let the truth reveal itself on its own terms? His eyes never drifted toward the rear of the room. Never once toward the kitchen doors, where I was sitting beside the ice machine. "We gather here in the name of love," Darius went on. "But for me, this day carries a weight beyond any ceremony. It marks a turning point. It marks the moment I stopped accepting that life is supposed to be hard. That it's supposed to be a grinding, thankless climb toward nothing." I lifted my lukewarm water and drank. I could see exactly where this speech was headed. When I was a kid, Darius said, his voice falling into something low and heavy, almost mournful. Everything I heard was about scarcity. Save every cent. Don't reach too high or you'll come crashing down. Ambition was treated like a disease in our house. The answer to everything was no. No, we can't swing that vacation. No, that car is out of our league. No, we don't gamble. A handful of guests tilted their heads in sympathy. What a hard life they were imagining. A boy raised by a man who kept the lights on and put money away for his education. The horror. Fear was the roof I grew up under. Darius said, one hand tightening on the microphone stand. A way of thinking that told me staying alive and actually living were the same thing. I carry love for my biological father wherever he happens to be tonight. He threw a loose, careless wave in the direction of the back wall, not even angling his arm toward me. Pure dismissal, the way you'd flick your wrist at something buzzing around your head. But that man belongs to a different era. The age of the assembly line of clocking in and clocking out. He could repair what was already broken. Building something from nothing was never in his vocabulary. A dull ache pressed into my sternum, but I kept my face still. I am an engineer. So I took his words apart the way I take apart a circuit diagram. I repair things. True enough. I repaired the electrical infrastructure currently sending power to the very microphone he stood behind. I kept the safety systems running at the hospital that brought him into the world. In his eyes, that kind of work was defeat. In mine, it is what holds everything else up. Then Darius's expression shifted. Something bright and eager moved across it. He turned his gaze to Garrison, and then Garrison Wolf walked into my life. The room broke into applause. Garrison spread his arms wide, soaking it in. Garrison didn't only come into my mother's world. Darius said, his voice climbing with feeling. He walked into mine. He made me understand that a man's worth isn't measured by what he sets aside, but by what he puts into motion. He told me the ceiling only exists if you agree to stand under it. In 6 months, Garrison showed me more about business, about nerve, and about what a man is supposed to be than anything I picked up across 35 years of just getting by. Just getting by. Mediocrity by another name. The phrase settled over the tables like smoke. Nadine had come undone. She pressed a silk napkin beneath each eye, watching Darius with a look of total adoration. She was certain this was a gift, her boy finally opening up. She had no idea she was watching him sign away everything that made him worth knowing. Garrison is the father I was never given, Darius announced. A beat of quiet, then the room came apart. Chairs scraped, bodies rose. They clapped and cheered as though something noble had just occurred. A standing ovation built on sand. I stayed rooted in my chair, back straight, eyes forward. I watched my own son bury 35 years of real history so he could hand a trophy to a man he'd known for half a year. He sees what others miss, Darius shouted into the noise. He is a titan, and I am honored, truly honored, to call him Dad. He reached for his champagne flute crystal, throwing off light like a prism. And so I raise a glass, Darius said. The room grew still, collectively holding its breath, to Garrison and Nadine, to the joining of beauty and power, to the years ahead, years where we stop counting pennies and start counting millions, years where money doesn't own us, we own it. To the Wolf legacy, to the Wolf legacy. 500 voices thundered back as one. Darius lifted the glass above his head. His mouth opened for one final word. Perhaps a toast. Perhaps I love you. We never got to find out. Because at that precise instant, a sharp, cracking boom punched through the ballroom, the kind of sound that snaps every head in the same direction. Half the room flinched, like they'd heard a shot. I knew exactly what it was. A main breaker collapsing under too much load. Feedback shrieked through every speaker in the room, a sound like tearing metal, and then every hand flew to cover every ear. After that, nothing. The blackout was total and immediate. The spotlight, the chandeliers, the exit signs, all of it snuffed out in sequence. The air conditioning groaned once and gave up. The room fell into complete pressing silence. Whatever light remained came from a handful of phone screens already in people's hands, painting pale, ghostly streaks across faces that had no idea what to feel. Nobody spoke. A frozen moment, the kind you get in the seconds after a collision, before anyone knows who's hurt. Then the whispers broke through. What just happened? Some kind of storm. Did a breaker go? I kept both hands flat on the table around my water glass, unmoving. No panic, no confusion. I knew to the letter what had occurred. This was not equipment failing on its own. The resort carried backup generators for exactly this situation. Any routine grid interruption would have handed control to the emergency system inside 10 seconds. 10 seconds came and went. Then 20. Pitch black wall to wall. Not an accident, not a grid hiccup, a deliberate cut. I found Garrison in the thin beam of someone's phone flashlight near the front of the room. He hadn't moved. He wasn't scanning the ceiling for answers. He wasn't flagging down staff. His eyes were locked on the main doors at the back of the hall. Darius was punching the dead microphone with his finger, looking bewildered. Dad, Garrison. Can someone tell me what's happening? I raised my glass and finished a slow, quiet sip. The water tasted different now. Cooler. Better. Then a hand landed on my shoulder. Aunt Cecile. Clifford. She breathed barely above a whisper. Her voice was unsteady. Is this meant to happen? Is someone about to jump out? I closed my other hand over hers and held it there in the dark. Yes, Aunt Cecile, I told her quietly. Something is about to happen. We're only at intermission. My attention moved to the service entrance at the back. Footsteps. Heavy ones crossing the park with an even unhurried rhythm. Nothing like the scramble of catering staff running to reset a breaker. These were the footfalls of people who knew why they were there and didn't need to rush. Darius had just made a toast to a world without penny counting. He was moments away from learning what fills that vacuum. When you stop keeping track, someone else picks up the ledger. And when their numbers don't balance, the lights go out. That darkness was no malfunction. It was a bill, and the due date was already behind them. The darkness lifted before long. The silence never quite did. When the backup generators finally engaged, they brought nothing resembling the chandelier glow that had made the evening feel like a dream. What came on instead were brutal blue-white emergency floods that flattened every shadow in the wrong direction and drained the warmth from every face in the room. The enchantment evaporated on contact. What replaced it was the kind of light you find in a loading dock or a holding room, exposing relentless unkind. It showed everything that the candlelight had been hiding: Brianna's heavy foundation, the dark patches spreading across Garrison's collar and back, the raw alarm behind Nadine's eyes. The PA system crackled back to life on the emergency feeds, spitting a feedback whine that made all 500 guests pull their shoulders up to their ears simultaneously. Garrison acted before anyone else could. His instincts, always sharpest when the walls were closing in, told him to perform. He knocked on the microphone twice, pasted on a grin that his eyes refused to support, and addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice rang out, bouncing oddly in the suddenly flat acoustics. Nothing more than a small technical bump. Apparently, even the power grid can't contain what we're generating in here tonight. Let's put our hands together for the crew getting this sorted. Scattered, polite clapping. It petered out fast because someone had appeared at the edge of the stage, climbing the stairs with a measured and entirely purposeful step. Not a sound engineer. Not the coordinator. The general manager of the resort himself. I recognized him from what I'd been told. The kind of operator who runs a hotel the way a master watchmaker runs his bench. Nothing out of place. Nothing left to chance. He came up the stairs to the head table without hesitation. A wireless payment terminal in one hand, a slim black folder tucked under the other arm. No greeting. No apology for the interruption. He went straight to Garrison. Garrison flattened his palm over the side of the microphone and tried to redirect him with a look. "Henri, not right now," he said under his breath. "We're still in the middle of things here." What Garrison hadn't accounted for in his rush to contain the situation was that he was covering the wrong part of the microphone. The element at the top was fully live, and the emergency sound system was running at maximum gain. "Mr. Wolf," the manager said in a tone that was measured and completely ordinary, except that it filled every cubic inch of that ballroom, reaching my corner table by the kitchen without losing a syllable. "There is an issue with the second installment payment." Garrison produced a laugh that sounded like something assembled from spare parts and rotated his body to put himself between the manager and the crowd. "An issue that'll be a timing thing on the wire transfer. My people in Zurich are probably halfway through lunch right now. Give it until Monday, and it resolves itself." The manager didn't shift an inch. He moved closer instead, shrinking the gap between them to nothing. "Sir, we processed the 3 cards you left on file. The American Express, Black, the Visa Infinite, and the corporate MasterCard." Garrison was sweating profusely now. Under the harsh emergency lights, he looked like he was dissolving. Yes, I know. High-volume transactions. They trigger security protocols. It happens when you operate at my level. Mr. Wolf." The manager cut him off, his voice ice cold. "The cards didn't trigger a security protocol. They triggered a fraud alert. 2 of them have been reported stolen from a Dr. Dale Krupnick in Florida. The 3rd has been declined for insufficient funds. The available balance was $12. The room went so quiet you could hear the ventilation hum. 500 people stopped breathing. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Stolen. Someone whispered at a nearby table. $12, muttered someone else. I leaned back in my chair and folded my arms. There it was. The first brick had fallen. Gravity was doing the rest. Garrison's face turned a color I had never seen on a living person, some unholy blend of gray and purple. He scanned the crowd, then the manager, then the microphone. He understood too late that every syllable had carried across the room. "This is ridiculous." Garrison sputtered, scrambling for righteous indignation. "Do you know who I am? I will buy this hotel and have you fired. This is a banking error, a glitch in the algorithm." The manager raised the payment terminal. It glowed red. "Sir, the contract requires 50% of the catering cost before the main course is served. That is $150,000. If we do not receive payment immediately, the kitchen stops service. The staff goes home. And I will be contacting the police regarding the stolen cards. $150,000. Garrison's eyes swept the room wildly. He looked at Darius, who stood there slack-jawed, looking like a fish dragged onto a dock. He looked toward his business partners at the VIP table, but they had all become suddenly fascinated by their phones or the ceiling. The man in the black suit, the real creditor, simply sat and watched, swirling his soda water, a predator savoring the spectacle. Garrison did the only thing a coward knows how to do. He pivoted. Nadine, my love, he said, turning to my ex-wife. He produced his most charming smile, but under the blue light it looked ghastly. Give Mr. Henri your card, the black one. You know how banks are with my international transfers. We'll sort it out in the morning. Just cover the catering for now. He stretched out his hand, expecting her to rescue him, expecting her to be the safety net she had always been. Nadine sat frozen in her chair. Her tiara had gone slightly crooked. The color had drained completely from her face. She stared at Garrison's outstretched hand, then up at his face. "Garrison," she whispered. Her voice trembled, but the microphone caught every word. "What do you mean? Just give him the card, darling." Garrison urged, his voice pulled tight. "We don't want the guests waiting on their crab." Nadine rose slowly as if moving through water. She clutched her sequin purse against her chest. I can't," she stammered. "What do you mean you can't?" Garrison snapped his composure, fraying fast. "Just hand him the card." "I don't have any money, Garrison!" Nadine screamed. The sound tore through the ballroom, raw, unfiltered panic. "What?" Garrison stepped back, staring at her, as though she were speaking a language he'd never heard. I gave it to you." She cried, tears cutting tracks through her makeup. "This morning in the hotel suite. You said you needed liquid capital to close the lithium deal before the market opened. You said if I didn't hand over everything, the deal would collapse." Garrison went still. He looked at the audience. He looked at the camera crew zooming in on his face. "I wired you everything." Nadine sobbed, her voice breaking apart. "The money from the house refinanced the savings account, the alimony settlement. I even cashed out my IRA. You told me you'd triple it by tonight. You said the wedding would be paid out of the profits." The silence that settled over the room was heavy, suffocating. It was the weight of a truth so enormous it had pushed all the air out. Nadine turned to the manager, hands trembling, pointing at Garrison. "He has the money. He has $600,000 of my money. Ask him." The manager shifted his gaze to Garrison. It was no longer a polite gaze. It was the look of a man who had just realized he was standing in front of a criminal. "Mr. Wolf," the manager said, "is this true? Can you provide an alternative method of payment using these funds?" Garrison opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He stared at his phone, tapping the screen frantically, hunting for some escape hatch, some button that would conjure money from thin air. It is in escrow," Garrison mumbled, barely audible now. "It is locked in the blockchain. It takes time to liquefy." "Liar." The word came from the front row. Not from Nadine. From Darius. My son shoved his chair back as he stood, sending it clattering to the floor. He looked at Garrison with a mixture of horror and betrayal that was hard to witness. "You told me the liquidity pool was instant," Darius shouted. "You made me sign over the trust fund an hour ago because you said you needed to bundle it. You said you had the cash on hand." I took a sip of water. The glass was cool against my fingers. So he had gone after the trust fund as well. A grim satisfaction settled in me, knowing the document Darius had handed him was worthless. The money was safe, shielded behind the clause I had inserted. Garrison had stolen a piece of paper. Nothing more. But he had taken everything else. Garrison looked at Darius, then at Nadine, then at the exit signs. "Now everyone, please, let's calm down," Garrison said, raising both hands in a gesture of surrender. "There is a straightforward explanation. The crypto market's volatility caused a temporary freeze. The money is there. It is simply inaccessible for 24 hours. "Inaccessible!" Nadine shrieked. She lunged at him, seizing the lapels of his white tuxedo. "You told me you bought this resort. You told me you owned the building. Now they are asking you for a credit card. I was in negotiations to acquire it. Garrison lied, trying to peel her fingers from his jacket. It is a complex transaction. Sir. The manager cut in, stepping between them. He gestured to two large security guards posted by the door. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me to my office. We will be contacting the local authorities to address these stolen cards. No. Garrison yelled, shoving Nadine backward. She stumbled and dropped into her chair, burying her face in her hands. I'm not going anywhere, Garrison shouted, his voice cracking apart. This is a conspiracy. You are all jealous of what I've built. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally. They landed on the VIP table. Help me, he screamed at the man in the black suit. Tell them about our partnership. Tell them the capital is coming. The man in the black suit did not stand. He did not speak. He simply lifted his napkin, dabbed the corners of his mouth, and slowly shook his head. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, not to call a banker, but to call his team and cut his losses. Garrison spun toward the crowd. Darius, fix this. Use your card. We will pay you back triple tomorrow. Darius stood there, his pockets turned inside out, empty. I gave you my card yesterday, Garrison, Darius whispered. You said you needed it to upgrade the honeymoon suite. The house of cards didn't just fall, it disintegrated. I sat in the back and watched the wreckage. The crab was never coming. The cake would never be cut. The orchestra had gone silent. I looked over at Brianna. She was frantically deleting posts from her Instagram, scrubbing the evidence of her bragging, trying to erase her connection to the disaster unraveling before her. I stood up. The show was over. The payoff had arrived, and it was brutal. But there was one more act to play. The police were on their way, and before they got here, the truth needed one final witness. I walked toward the front of the room. The crowd parted for me. I wasn't the invisible man anymore. In a room full of bankrupt fools, the man with a transit card and a clear conscience is the king. Garrison saw me coming. His eyes locked onto mine. For the first time, he wasn't looking at me with arrogance. He was looking at me with recognition. He knew that I knew. Clifford. He gasped, sweat gleaming on his face. Clifford, tell them. Tell them I am good for it. You know business, you know how these things work. I stopped in front of the head table. I looked at Nadine sobbing in her ruined dress. I looked at Darius broken and hollowed out. And I looked at Garrison, the architect of their destruction. I reached into my pocket. I didn't pull out a checkbook. I pulled out the police report. I set it down gently on the table right beside the microphone. I don't know business, Garrison. I said, my voice calm and level, carried by the hot mic to every corner of the room. I'm just a simple electrician, but I know that when the lights go out, it's usually because somebody didn't pay the bill. I turned to the manager. Sir, I said, tapping the document. I think this might help you with your paperwork. His name isn't Garrison Wolf, and he has a warrant in Florida that is about to expire. The payoff was complete, and it cost me nothing at all. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of dense, suffocating quiet that comes just before a natural disaster. The police report lay on the white tablecloth like something radioactive. Garrison stared at it, eyes bulging, chest heaving beneath his sweat-soaked tuxedo shirt. He looked like a man who had been sprinting for 10 years and had just run headlong into a wall. But before Garrison could stammer out another lie, before he could spin another tale about misunderstood geniuses and banking errors, a chair scraped hard against the parquet floor. The sound rang through the cavernous room, sharp, deliberate. At the VIP table, the man in the black suit rose to his feet. He didn't rush. He didn't look angry. He buttoned his jacket with a slow, methodical ease that was far more unsettling than any raised voice could have been. He adjusted his tinted glasses, lifted his glass of soda water, and moved toward the stage. The crowd parted for him on instinct. There was something around him, a gravitational pull of authority, that made senators and CEOs step aside without thinking. He climbed the steps to the head table, his heavy footfalls keeping time with the pounding of 500 anxious hearts. He stopped beside me. He looked down at the police report on the table. He gave a single nod, a gesture of professional acknowledgement. "You missed a page, Clifford," he said. His voice was deep, gravelly, filling the room without any need for amplification. "But the report is accurate as far as it goes." He reached into his inner jacket pocket and produced a thick envelope. He tossed it onto the table next to my document. It landed with a heavy slap. Garrison, or should I say Dale, flinched as though he'd been struck. "Who is this?" Nadine cried out, her voice shrill and edging toward hysteria. She looked back and forth between me and the stranger, eyes wide. "Is he a business partner? Is he the banker? Garrison, tell them who he is?" Garrison couldn't speak. He was hyperventilating, shaking his head frantically at the stranger, his eyes doing all the work, a silent, desperate plea for mercy. "Please don't. Please stop." The stranger paid him no mind. He turned to Nadine. He removed his glasses, revealing those cold gray eyes that had taken me apart at the bar earlier in the evening. "I'm not a banker, ma'am," he said. "My name is Detective Okafor. I'm the private investigator licensed in the state of Florida, and I am currently on the payroll of Mrs. Loretta Krupnik." Nadine blinked, tears dripping off her chin. Who is Loretta Krupnik?" The stranger smiled, though there was nothing warm in it. It was the smile of a hunter who has finally run his quarry to ground. "She is the woman who has been married to this man for 15 years, he said, leveling a finger at Garrison. "She is the mother of his 3 children in Tallahassee, and she is the woman whose life savings he cleaned out 6 months ago before he vanished and came here to find a new mark." A collective gasp tore through the room, a physical thing, like every last molecule of oxygen being pulled from the ballroom at once. "Married," someone whispered. "3 children." Nadine grabbed the edge of the table to hold herself upright. Her knees gave, and she sank back into her chair, her white dress settling around her like a collapsing parachute. "No," she whispered. "That's impossible. We just got married. I signed the papers. The license is invalid," the stranger said, his voice slicing through her denial. "You cannot legally marry a man who is already married. This wedding is a sham. The vows are void, and frankly, given that he used a false name on the application, I doubt the paperwork got past the county clerk's trash bin." He turned his gaze back to Garrison. "Hello, Dale," he said quietly. "Long time no see. You're a hard man to run down. You cycle through names the way most people cycle through socks. Garrison Wolfe, Owen Casper, Rex Halden. Quite the imagination." Garrison found his voice. It came out as a high, strangled squeak. "This is slander," he screamed, backing away until he bumped into the DJ booth. "I don't know this man. He's an actor. Clifford hired him. This is a setup." The stranger let out a laugh, dry, humorless, the bark of someone who has heard every excuse. "A setup." He scooped up the envelope he'd tossed on the table and tore it open. Photographs spilled out, dozens of them. "Here you are in Miami selling non-existent condos to retirees," the stranger said, flipping a photo toward the crowd. "Here you are in Dallas running a bogus charity for veterans. And here you are last week meeting with a loan shark in Philadelphia because your Ponzi scheme was running dry." He addressed the 500 guests who were now on their feet, phones raised recording the demolition of a socialite's life. "That's what this is, folks," the stranger announced. "A classic Ponzi. He uses the money from the new wife to pay off the debts of the old life. He promised you 300% returns on Liberty coin. There is no coin. There is no lithium mine. There is just a bank account in the Caymans he uses to fund his suits and his rental cars." Darius stepped forward. My son looked like a ghost face the color of ash. He picked up one of the photographs. It showed Garrison or Dale wearing a fast food uniform standing outside a burger joint. The timestamp was just 2 years back. You were a fry cook," Darius whispered. Garrison snatched the photo away. "I was doing research for a franchise investment, but Darius wasn't listening. Reality was caving in on him. The stock options, the VP title, the millions, all of it smoke. "Where is the trust fund?" Darius demanded, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "The paper I signed, where is it?" Garrison's eyes darted around the room. "It is safe. It is processed. It is gone," the stranger corrected. "Or it would be if your father hadn't been smart enough to lock it down. But the rest, the money from the house, the alimony." He looked at Nadine. "Mrs. Hahn, I am sorry to have to tell you this, but he wired your $600,000 to an offshore sports betting site 3 hours ago. He was trying to double it on a soccer match in Brazil." "Did he win?" Clifford asked. I spoke for the first time since the stranger had taken the floor. The stranger looked at me and shook his head. "He bet on the underdog Clifford. He lost everything." Nadine let out a wail that didn't sound human, the sound of a wounded creature. She lunged across the table, sending the wedding cake crashing to the floor. The towering 5-tier confection exploded in a wreckage of fondant and cream. She clawed at Garrison's face, screaming in incoherent fury. "You thief, you monster, my house, my life!" Garrison shoved her away hard without hesitation, sending her sprawling into the ruined cake. He was done pretending. The charade was finished. The mask was gone. His eyes found the doors. The exit signs burned red in the low light. "Stay back!" Garrison shouted, thrusting a hand inside his jacket. For a single frozen second, the room thought he had a gun. People screamed and dove beneath tables, but he didn't produce a weapon. He produced a passport. He launched himself off the stage, landing awkwardly and rolling his ankle, but adrenaline kept him upright. He scrambled to his feet and bolted for the side exit, the one that fed into the kitchen and the loading dock. "Stop him!" Darius yelled, though he was too stunned to move himself. Garrison plowed into a waiter balancing a tray of champagne. Glass exploded across the floor. He shoved past Aunt Cecile, who swung her purse at him, and missed. He was running for his life. He hit the double doors and threw his full weight against them, expecting them to burst open into freedom. They didn't move. He shoved again. He drove his shoulder into the wood. Locked. He spun around, panic carved into every line of his sweat-soaked face. He charged back toward the main entrance, but as he reached the center of the room, the main doors swung open. Not for him. They opened for 4 uniformed police officers who marched in, trailed by the 2 security guards I had clocked earlier in the evening. Garrison skidded to a stop. Trapped. Behind him, the furious crowd. In front of him, the law. He looked left. He looked right. He looked at me. I was still standing at the head table beside the ruined cake and his weeping false bride. I raised my water glass in his direction. "Checkmate, Dale," I said quietly. The officers moved in. Garrison tried to dodge, but the security guard, a man built like a vending machine, caught him by the back of his expensive, sweat-soaked tuxedo. He yanked Garrison off his feet and drove him down onto a table, sending silverware skittering across the floor. "I am a diplomat," Garrison screamed, his face mashed against a plate of untouched salad. "I have immunity. I am a sovereign citizen. You are a con artist with a warrant," the officer said, snapping the cuffs onto his wrists. "And you have the right to remain silent, though I genuinely hope you don't, because every word out of your mouth makes our case easier." The room detonated into chaos. Camera flashes strobed. People shouted, wept, demanded answers. Brianna was shrieking at a police officer that she barely knew him, that she was a victim too. Darius was on the floor, back against the wall, staring at the ceiling in a state of total shutdown. And Nadine was sitting in the ruins of her own wedding cake, white frosting smeared across her face like clown makeup, sobbing into both hands. The stranger crossed the room toward me. He slid his glasses back on. "My client in Florida will be satisfied," he said. "We won't recover the money, that's just the reality. It's gone. But at least she gets to watch him wear orange." He surveyed the wreckage around us. "You know Clifford," he said. "Most people would have stepped in sooner. They would have tried to protect them before the money was transferred. Why did you hold back?" I looked at my ex-wife. I looked at the son who had tried to have me declared incompetent. "Because, Detective," I said, "if I had shut him down yesterday, they would have despised me for wrecking their dream. They would have called me jealous. They would have blamed me for every dollar they lost. They needed to watch that check bounce with their own eyes." I smoothed the front of my jacket. "Sometimes the only way to fix a faulty circuit is to let it burn itself out completely. Then you can rewire from scratch." The police hauled Garrison toward the exit. He was crying now, begging Nadine to call his lawyer, begging Darius to post bail. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The wedding was finished. The marriage had been a lie. The fortune had been a myth. And I, the failure, the man of the past, was the only one still standing upright in the wreckage. The arrival of the police was nothing like the movies. No distant sirens giving a fleeing man time to locate a back door or pull himself together. It was sudden, total, and overwhelming. One moment, the ballroom was a churning sea of confused guests and a sprinting groom. The next, it was a tactical operation. 4 uniformed officers and 2 plainclothes detectives came through the main doors, carrying the kind of kinetic authority that pulls the oxygen from a room. They didn't run, but they moved with a heavy, synchronized purpose that you could feel through the floorboards. I stood near the head table, my hand resting close to the ruined wedding cake, watching the demolition crew arrive. In my line of work, when a structure is unsound, you bring in specialists to bring it down safely. These officers were the specialists. Garrison Wolf was the condemned building. Garrison saw them coming. He was pinned against the locked service doors, chest heaving, white tuxedo jacket drenched through, probably charged to a stolen card. For a fraction of a second, I watched him run the numbers. He glanced towards the kitchen entrance, then back at the wall of blue uniforms tightening around him. He had the look of a rat discovering the maze holds no cheese, only traps. "Get on the ground!" the lead officer commanded. His voice was a blunt instrument, sharp, authoritative, slicing right through the noise of the crowd. Garrison didn't get on the ground. He raised his hands and produced that polished salesman's smile one final time. Pure reflex. Pure muscle memory. He genuinely believed he could negotiate with gravity. "Officers," he said, voice cracking at the edges. "There has been a misunderstanding here. I am Garrison Wolf. I am a venture capitalist. I can make a call. I know the mayor." The officer had no interest in the mayor. He closed the gap in 2 strides, seized Garrison's arm, and spun him around. With a practiced economy of motion, he kicked Garrison's legs apart and drove him face first into the wall. You are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. The officer recited flat routine like reading a grocery list. My arm watched the suit. Garrison shrieked, his dignity evaporating on contact. This is Italian silk. Do you have any idea what this cost him? The only answer he got was the metallic snap of handcuffs ratcheting shut. Click, click. The circuit was broken. The power was cut. As they pulled him upright and turned him to face the room he had tried to take over, the reality finally reached Nadine. Until that moment, she had been frozen in shock, a statue of denial parked in a pile of cake and shattered glass. But seeing the man she had worshipped, the man she had left me for, standing there in cuffs, it broke through. She didn't cry out for him, though. She didn't scream his name or worry about what would happen to him. She screamed for the only thing she had ever truly loved, my money. She scrambled up from her chair, slipping on the frosting, her ruined dress tangling around her legs. She looked feral hair pulling loose from its elaborate style mascara, cutting dark lines down her face like war paint. She didn't move toward Garrison to comfort him. She moved toward him to tear him apart. "You bastard!" she screamed, her voice ragged. $2 million. You have $2 million of mine. She tried to lunge at him, but a female officer stepped into her path and held her back with quiet firmness. "Ma'am, step back. He has my house." Nadine screamed, leveling a shaking finger at Garrison. "The deed, the equity, I handed him everything this morning. He said he was putting it in a trust. He said we were buying the resort." Garrison, wrists cuffed behind his back, looked at her. The charm had gone. Whatever warmth he had ever performed was gone. What remained was the bare sneer of a predator who had already finished feeding. "It is gone, Nadine," Garrison said coldly. "It is in the Caymans. You wanted a high roller, that is the entry fee." "You thief!" Nadine wailed, collapsing to her knees in the center of the dance floor. That was my retirement. That was my life, Clifford." She swept the room with desperate eyes until she found me in the crowd. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking at me with contempt. She was looking at me with raw, naked need. "Clifford, tell them. Tell them to get my money back. You know how to fix things. Fix this." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had mocked my pension, who had called my savings small time, who had hurled a transit card at me in a parking lot. A deep, heavy sadness moved through me, but no impulse to step forward. You cannot fix a house that has burned to its foundation. You can only sweep the ash. "I can't fix this, Nadine," I said softly, knowing she couldn't hear me above her own screaming. "You didn't blow a circuit. You sold the copper wiring." But while Nadine was grieving her bank account, Darius was grieving his ego. My son had been rooted near the podium, watching the arrest, with an expression of complete incomprehension. To him, Garrison wasn't merely a stepfather. Garrison had been the living proof of every lazy, greedy impulse Darius had ever nurtured. Garrison was evidence that you didn't have to grind to be wealthy. If Garrison was a fraud, then Darius was a fool, and Darius would sooner die than admit to being a fool. "Stop!" Darius shouted. He charged down the steps of the stage and planted himself between the officers, and Garrison, arms spread wide, blocking the path. He looked absurd, a young man in a tuxedo trying to halt a freight train. "You are making a mistake," Darius yelled. "This man is a billionaire. He owns Wolf Capital. He is about to launch a cryptocurrency that will change the entire world." "Darius, shut up!" Garrison hissed, straining against the officer's grip. "No." Darius pressed on his voice, climbing higher. I saw the charts. I saw the lithium mines on his laptop. This is a conspiracy. You are trying to bring him down because he is disrupting the banking industry." The lead officer stopped. He studied Darius with a look caught somewhere between irritation and pity, a big, tired man, probably deep into a double shift, with no bandwidth left for delusions. "Son, step aside," the officer said evenly. I won't!" Darius screamed. He grabbed Garrison's arm and tried to wrench him free from the officer's hold. "Let him go. He has a meeting in Tokyo. He is my business partner." The officer's patience gave out. He didn't reach for his weapon. He didn't raise his voice. He simply extended one arm and pushed Darius, not a violent shove, but a decisive one. Darius stumbled backward over his own expensive shoes and went down hard onto the floor. He landed right beside his mother. "Stay down," the officer said, jabbing a finger toward Darius's face. "Unless you want to join him. We have a warrant for Dale Krupnick, and if you keep obstructing, we will add you to the booking sheet as an accomplice. Do you want to go to jail for aiding and abetting a known felon?" Darius blinked up at him. The word accomplice hung in the air like smoke. "But I am the vice president," Darius whispered, his voice barely holding together. "Now you are the vice president of nothing," the officer said flatly. "There is no company. There is no mine. There is just a laptop stuffed with Photoshop and a list of victims. Now sit there and keep your mouth shut before I cuff you as well." Darius looked over at Garrison, searching for the confident billionaire who had promised him everything. Garrison wouldn't meet his eyes. He was staring at the floor, murmuring about bail money. Darius looked out at the crowd. 500 people were watching him. Not with envy anymore. With disgust. They were whispering to one another. "That's the son," they said. "He was in on it. He gave the speech." The illusion fractured. I watched it happen in real time. I watched the light go out of my son's as the fantasy he had built his entire identity around buckled and collapsed under the weight of reality. He wasn't a tycoon. He was a dupe. He was a 35-year-old man sitting on a ballroom floor defending the person who had looted his mother's future. The police began marching Garrison toward the exit. The crowd parted, phones raised high, capturing every step of the walk of shame. Camera flashes strobed like a lightning storm. Garrison tried to keep his chin up, but the drag of the handcuffs pulled his shoulders forward and down. As he passed me, he slowed for just a fraction of a second. "Clifford," he muttered, "the bet on the match. It was a sure thing." "Keep moving," the officer said, pushing him forward. I watched them go. I watched the blue and red pulse of the cruiser lights outside catch and spread across the glass doors. In the center of the room, what was left of my family. Nadine was rocking back and forth, gripping a torn piece of tablecloth, murmuring numbers to herself. 2 million. 2 million. Darius was staring at his own hands as though he expected to find something on them. Brianna, who had been hovering near the chocolate fountain, finally stepped forward. She looked down at Darius on the floor. She didn't reach down to help him up. She didn't ask if he was hurt. She pulled off her ring, the one Darius had bought on credit, and dropped it into his lap. "You idiot," she hissed. "You told me he was real. You told me I was going to be rich." She turned and walked away, her heels striking the parquet in a steady, indifferent rhythm, leaving my son alone in the wreckage he had helped build. I stood there a moment longer. The air conditioning groaned back to life, pushing cold air over the sweating, shell-shocked crowd. The room smelled of stale perfume and fear. I straightened my cuffs. I checked my pocket to confirm my passport and plane ticket were where I'd put them. Then I walked over to where Darius sat and stood over him, casting a shadow across him, the same way he had spent years living in mine, resentful and blind. He looked up. His eyes were red, wet, and hollow. "Dad," he whispered. I didn't know. I looked down at him. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I felt the cold, clean clarity of a set of books that has finally been brought into balance. "You didn't want to know, Darius," I said. "That is the difference." I turned my back on them. There was nothing left here to repair. The power was out, the wiring was destroyed, and the structure was condemned. It was time to go back to Porto, where the lights burned steady and the people were real. There is a particular kind of sleep that only comes to a man who has settled his accounts. It is deep. It is dreamless. It is the sleep of a mechanic who knows every bolt is torqued and every wire is properly insulated. For the first time in months, I wasn't lying in a house that felt like a museum to my failures. I was in a hotel bed with clean, crisp linens paid for with money that was entirely my own in a city where the truth had finally been spoken aloud. The digital clock on the nightstand read 2:14 in the morning when the phone rang. Not a soft chime. In the dead quiet of the luxury suite, it sounded like a fire alarm going off 3 inches from my ear. I didn't jump. I didn't panic. I rolled over slowly, my joints protesting in the cool air, and reached out a hand with 40 years of cable-pulling calluses and found the device on the nightstand. The screen blazed in the darkness. The name flashing on it was one I had thought about blocking a dozen times. "Nadine." I stared at it. The phone buzzed against the wood, insistent, almost angry. Part of me, the part that was still the young man who met her at a church picnic in 1969, wanted to leave it face down and return to that quiet, paid-for sleep. But the engineer in me is trained to investigate alarms. You don't ignore a warning light just because you don't like what it's telling you. I swiped the green button. I didn't say hello. I just brought the phone to my ear and waited. For the first 10 seconds, there were no words, only sound. Wind battering a microphone, distant sirens, and breathing so ragged and wet it resembled a punctured lung. Clifford. Her voice was a ghost of the one that had screamed at me in the restaurant. It was small. It was broken. It was the voice of a child who has dropped an ice cream cone in the dirt. "Clifford, are you there? Please, God, tell me you're there." I sat up and swung my legs over the side of the bed. I placed my feet flat on the carpet and reached for the water bottle on the nightstand. "I am here, Nadine," I said. My voice was rough from sleep, but steady. "Oh, thank God! Thank God! Clifford, you have to help me. You have to come get me." I took a sip of water. "Where are you?" I'm on the curb outside the resort. They threw us out, Clifford. They physically removed us. After the police took Garrison, the manager told us we had 30 minutes to clear the premises. 30 minutes. I couldn't pack everything. I left my shoes. I left my makeup bag. She paused to sob a loud, raw sound that distorted the call. And then they put a seal on the door. A red sticker, Clifford. They said the suite was a crime scene because Garrison had stored documents in there. I have nowhere to go. I tried to use my card for a taxi and it was declined. They froze everything. The bank froze everything because of the investigation. I listened. I looked out the window at the Philadelphia skyline. The lights were still twinkling, utterly indifferent to the tragedy of Mrs. Nadine Hawn Wolfe. "And Darius?" I asked. He's sitting on his suitcase. He won't speak." "Clifford, it is bad. It is so bad. The police said Darius is a person of interest because he signed those loan documents as a guarantor because he was listed as an officer of the company. They took his passport, Clifford. They took it right there in the lobby." Her voice rose, panic threading through every word. "They are going to arrest our son, Clifford. They said he is liable for the catering bill. They said he is liable for the yacht. He doesn't have that kind of money. He is going to prison. You cannot let that happen. He is your blood. He is your only son. I closed my eyes. I remembered Darius standing on that stage calling Garrison his real father. I remembered Darius trying to bully me into signing over the trust fund. I remembered Darius telling me I was mediocre. He is an adult Nadine, I said. He wanted to be a businessman. This is business. But no, don't be cruel. Not now. This is not the time for a lesson. She drew a ragged breath. I could hear the wind hammering on her end. It had to be 40 degrees outside. She was probably still in that ruined wedding dress. Clifford, listen to me. I made a mistake, all right, I admit it. I was foolish. I got swept up. But I am still your wife. In the eyes of God, I am still your wife. That ceremony, it was fake. The man was a fraud. That means we are still us. We are still Clifford and Nadine. I tightened my grip on the phone. The sheer audacity of it stole my breath. It was a moral collapse so total, so structurally complete. I nearly found myself impressed. We are not us, Nadine, I said. We haven't been us for a very long time. But we have history. 40 years, Clifford. You can't simply discard that over one bad year. I know you. I know what's in your heart. You are a protector. You fix things. That is what you do. You step in when things fall apart. I am broken, Clifford. Your family is broken. Please. I know you have the money now. I heard what you said in the ballroom. $8 million. That is an enormous sum. More than enough to make this right. Her voice dropped, searching for that intimate register she used to reach for whenever she wanted a new car or a vacation. We had no business booking. You can settle the hotel debt. You can retain a lawyer for Darius. You can get me a suite. We sit down, we talk. We begin again. I will sign whatever you put in front of me. I will go to Portugal with you. I always wanted to see Europe. I let her speak. I let the quiet stretch between us. I glanced at the clock. 2:20. She had been going for 6 minutes. She was negotiating. She was offering herself like she was doing me a favor. She still believed I was the man who used to chase her approval, the man who counted himself fortunate just to exist inside her world. She thought my self-respect carried a price, and that price was $8 million earned. Clifford, why aren't you saying anything? Say something, please. Tell me you're coming. Tell me you still love me. I know you do. A love like ours doesn't just die. She was right about that one thing. Love doesn't just die. It gets murdered, beaten to death by insults, starved through neglect, run through with betrayal, and at last buried beneath an avalanche of greed. My love didn't die tonight, Nadine. It died the day you looked at these hands, the hands that built your entire life, and called them dirty. I drew a slow breath. A strange weightlessness settled in my chest. The last of it was gone. Nadine, I said. Yes, yes, darling. I need you to listen closely. I'm listening. I am listening. You have a phone. Good. Mind the battery. What? You are asking the wrong man for help, Nadine. I am not your husband. I am not your rescuer. And I am certainly not your bank. I'm just someone watching from the stands. Clifford, don't. The person you need to call right now is not me. I went on. My voice was as cold and final as a breaker snapping shut. You need to look up the number for the Philadelphia Common Pleas Courthouse Public Defender's Office. Dead silence on the line. What? She breathed. a public defender. But those are for poor people. I know, I said. And then I did the kindest thing I had left to offer. I hung up. No drama, no slammed receiver. I simply pressed the red button. The sobbing, the wind, the manipulation, all of it vanished at once. I set the phone face down on the nightstand. I sat for a moment inside the stillness of the room. I poured a glass of water and drank it without hurrying. I thought about Darius perched on his suitcase. I thought about Nadine shivering somewhere in the cold. A pang of pity moved through me. Yes, I am human. But pity is not the same as obligation. I had given them every opportunity. I had warned them. I had tried to be a father and a husband across decades. They had made their choice. They had chosen the fast lane, the easy money, the glittering surface. Now they were discovering that when you build on sand, you don't get to call the carpenter when the tide rolls in. I lay back. I pulled the duvet up to my chin. The sheets were cool and soft. I closed my eyes. Tomorrow I would fly back to Porto. I would buy fresh bread. I would sit beside the river, and I would never ever pick up that phone again. I was asleep in minutes. The morning light cutting through the hotel lobby's glass atrium was sharp, relentless, and precisely what I needed. I had checked out of my suite 10 minutes ahead of time. My bill was paid in full. My luggage was packed with the military precision of a man who had lived out of a toolbox for half a lifetime. I had on a comfortable travel sweater and reading glasses, looking every inch the retired grandfather I was always meant to be. I felt light. I felt free. Whatever toxicity the night before had carried a hot shower, and 8 hours of sleep had rinsed it clean. I rolled my suitcase toward the revolving doors, ready to board the shuttle to Philadelphia International Airport. I was already half back in Porto in my mind, breathing in the salt air, tasting grilled fish. But as I came around the large potted palm near the concierge desk, my way was blocked. Not by anything physical, but it might as well have been a wall. Standing there looking like survivors pulled from a wreck were Brianna and Darius. They bore no resemblance to the arrogant power couple who had sneered at my suit 24 hours before. Darius still had on the tuxedo trousers from the wedding, but his shirt hung open and stained something dark, probably red wine, and he wasn't wearing shoes. Just hotel slippers. Brianna, the Instagram model who wouldn't step outside without a filter, looked wrecked. Hair scraped into a messy bun, face bare of makeup, dark circles exposed beneath her eyes, and wearing a frantic, cornered expression I recognized instantly. It was the look of a client who cuts the wrong wire and sees the sparks already flying. "Clifford!" Brianna cried out. She didn't wait for me to stop. She rushed at me and seized my arm with both hands, her grip far stronger than I expected. "Dad. Oh, thank God we caught you. Please don't go. You can't go." I stopped pulling my suitcase. I looked down at her hands bunched in my sweater. I carefully but firmly unwound her fingers. "I have a flight to catch, Brianna," I said. My voice was steady. The same voice I use when I have to tell a homeowner their entire breaker panel needs replacing. "No, you don't understand," she sobbed. The tears came immediately welling and spilling over, voluminous and frightened. "We're sorry, Dad. So sorry. We were stupid. We were blind. Garrison, that man, he poisoned our thinking. He made us believe things that weren't real." She glanced back at Darius, who stood several steps behind her, eyes fixed on the floor, carrying the look of a man waiting to hear a verdict. "Tell him, Darius," Brianna urged. "Tell your father how sorry we are." Darius raised his eyes. They were red at the rims. I saw shame in them, yes, but I also saw the same old weakness that had put him here. He was still searching for someone to carry the load. I'm sorry, Dad, Darius said quietly. I really messed up. You didn't just mess up, son, I said. You destroyed your life. Those are two different things. Brianna stepped between us and took hold of the story again. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, reaching for something small and childlike. We know, Dad, we know. But we can fix it. We're family, aren't we? Family forgives, family rebuilds. Only we have a problem. A serious problem. I waited. The ask was coming. It always does. They threw us out of the hotel, Brianna said, her voice falling to nearly nothing. And the police seized the apartment. Said it was bought with fraud money. We have nowhere to go, Dad. Literally nowhere. Nadine is at a shelter downtown. We slept on a lobby couch until security moved us along. I looked at my watch. 30 minutes before the shuttle. What is it you need? Brianna pulled in a long breath. She pressed one hand flat against her stomach, a theatrical gesture, the kind you see in a bad movie. I wasn't going to tell you this way, she said, tilting her head to look up at me through her lashes. But I'm pregnant. I didn't flinch. I didn't make a sound. I looked at her stomach. It was flat as a countertop. Pregnant, I said. Yes. She nodded fast and emphatic. 6 weeks. We found out just before the wedding. That's why we were so desperate, Dad. That's why Darius believed Garrison. We were trying to build something solid for your grandchild, for the next generation of Hawns. She reached for my hand again and tried to press it to her belly. You're going to be a grandfather, Clifford. A grandpa. Don't you want your grandchild to have a home? Don't you want him growing up in the house his grandfather built? I drew my hand back. The manipulation was so artless it bordered on offensive. So here's what we need. Brianna pressed on, convinced she'd set the hook. We need you to buy the house back. The bank is moving toward auction. If you step in now with the patent money with cash, you can stop it. We all live there together. You, me, Darius, the baby. A real family. Your room is still yours. The basement workroom is exactly as you left it. She produced a trembling, hopeful smile. Please, Dad, do it for the baby. I glanced over at Darius. He was nodding along, clutching the life raft his wife had just thrown out. Yeah, Dad, Darius said. For the baby. I took one step back. I looked at the two of them. I looked at the marble floor. I looked at the chandelier hanging above us. I shifted into engineer mode. I stripped out the emotion, the tears, the word grandfather, and examined the raw data. Brianna. I began, you say you're pregnant. Yes. 6 weeks along, you said. Yes. Interesting. I said, because 2 nights ago at the rehearsal dinner, I watched you put away 4 glasses of champagne. And on the yacht, you were taking shots of tequila with the bridesmaids. Now either you are the most reckless mother ever to draw breath, or you are lying to an old man to get into his wallet. Brianna's face drained of color. Her mouth worked open and shut, but nothing came out. Let's assume for the sake of argument that you're telling the truth. I went on, my voice going hard. Let's say there is a child. You want me to buy the house back? Yes, she whispered. Then let's look at the numbers, I said. I raised my hand and began counting on my fingers. The house was appraised at $700,000. Nadine had pulled $600,000 out of it through a high-interest equity line. That money is gone, stolen. If I buy the house back, I am not acquiring an asset. I am acquiring a liability. I would need to clear the bank's lien before I could even take title. I moved a step closer. I am a businessman, Brianna. I am an investor. Why would I spend $700,000 on a property now worth maybe $500,000 after the market dropped, only to inherit a $600,000 debt sitting on top of it? That is a net loss of over $1 million. But it's your home, Brianna cut in. It has sentimental value. Sentimental value doesn't keep the lights on, I said sharply. And it certainly doesn't cover poor decisions. I turned to Darius. You want a house? I asked. Get work. Rent a place. Start at the bottom the way I did. The way any man has to when he hits the ground. We can't, Brianna wailed, the soft performance dissolving into raw panic. We have bad credit. Darius's score is wrecked from the inquiries. We don't have cash for a deposit. Then go to a shelter, I said. A shelter? Brianna gasped. Like with homeless people? Yes, I said. With people who are facing their situation honestly unlike you. I reached for the handle of my suitcase. You are cruel, Brianna screamed, abandoning all pretense. You are a bitter, selfish old man. You are sitting on millions. You could end this with one signature. Your family is suffering, and you are just hoarding it. I stopped. I turned back to face them one final time. I am not hoarding it, I said. I am guarding it. Guarding it from people who believe tears are legal tender. I am an engineer, Brianna. I work from structural integrity and load-bearing limits, and the two of you right now are a collapsed bridge. I am not driving my truck across it just because you asked nicely. I let my eyes drop to her stomach. And if there really is a baby, I said, my voice falling to a quiet, dangerous register. God help that child, because if his parents believe lying and begging is a career plan, he hasn't got a chance. I turned around. The automatic doors slid open with a hiss. The cold Philadelphia air hit my face and it felt like freedom. I didn't look back. I could hear Brianna hurling insults behind me. I could hear Darius sobbing, but it was just noise, the sound of a machine that had failed because the operators never read the manual. I walked to the curb. The shuttle was waiting. The driver, a man about my age, climbed out and took my bag. Heading home, sir? He asked. I looked up at the gray sky, then shut my eyes and saw the orange roof tiles of Porto. Yes, I said. I am heading home. And this time I am not leaving a forwarding address. You're just a bitter old man? Darius screamed, his voice cracking under the weight of his own helplessness. He stepped away from Brianna and thrust a shaking finger at my chest. You're enjoying this, aren't you? You love watching us beg. But who are you really, Dad? A retired electrician, living on a pension, clipping coupons, driving a truck that's 10 years old. You act like some big shot who could save us if he wanted, but we know the truth. You don't have the money to buy that house back. You were bluffing just to hurt us. The accusation hung in the cold morning air. The shuttle driver who'd been stowing my suitcase in the hold paused and looked over at us. He took in Darius's open tuxedo shirt and hotel slippers. Then he took in me travel sweater reading glasses. He said nothing, but the judgment was clear in his face. He saw a decent older man being cornered by someone drunk or strung out. I could have stepped onto that bus right then. I could have let Darius keep his delusion, the noble move. But I am not a noble man today. I am a man who was written out of his own family's story for decades. A man who was told he was small. A man told he was a failure for not driving a Bentley. And there are moments when you have been told long enough that you are nothing when you need to show the world precisely what something looks like. I held up a finger to signal the driver to wait. Then I turned back to my son. You think I'm broke, I said quietly. You think my refusal is about what I can afford, rather than what I choose. Darius let out a laugh, wet fractured on the edge of hysteria. Of course you're broke. Mom took 60%. You live in Portugal because it's cheap. You are a poverty refugee, Dad. Stop the act. I reached into the inside pocket of my coat, not for a wallet. I pulled out a slim leather case. From it, I drew a single business card, not mine. It was heavy cream stock, embossed black lettering. I held it out. Darius didn't want to take it, but curiosity fired before he could stop it. He snatched the card from my fingers. Read it, I said. Read the company name. Darius squinted at the card. Veld and Kramer Energy Solutions, he read. Munich, Germany. So what? What, you know a German guy. Good for you. Turn it over, I said. He flipped it. On the back, in handwritten blue ink, was a row of numbers. What is this? Darius asked. A phone number. It is a wire transfer confirmation code, I said. The date beside it is yesterday. I stepped closer, close enough to make him hold my gaze. You are right, Darius. I am a retired electrician. But you forgot which kind. I didn't just screw in light bulbs. I designed systems. And 10 years ago, I patented a smart circuit interrupter that stops catastrophic surges in industrial power grids. For a long time, nobody wanted it. Too advanced. Too expensive. I paused, letting that settle. But the world caught up. Green energy grids need intelligent protection. Veld and Kramer had been courting me for 6 months. We were hammering out terms while I sat on my terrace in Porto. And yesterday, while you were raising a toast to a con man, and your mother was marrying a felon, I was on a video call with their board of directors. Brianna had stopped crying. She stood staring at me, mouth slightly open. The machinery behind her eyes had shifted from working me to calculating me. What does that mean? She whispered. It means I sold the patent rights, I said. Exclusivity for the North American and European markets. For how much? Darius asked. His voice had shrunk to almost nothing. He looked down at the cards again, as if the figure might surface there. I looked at the shuttle. The engine idled with a low, steady rumble that felt like power itself. The final closing price was $8 million, I said. The silence that followed was nothing like the silence in the ballroom. The ballroom silence had been shock. This silence was death. The sound of an entire universe folding in on itself. 8, Darius repeated. Million. Cash. I clarified. Up front. No stock options, no crypto, no future promises. $8 million wired into my account in Zurich yesterday afternoon. And here is the best part. I went on, letting a small, cold smile settle on my lips. The divorce was finalized 6 months ago. The asset division is closed. Nadine's lawyers were very thorough. They took the house. They took the cash on hand. But it never occurred to them to ask about intellectual property that hadn't been monetized yet. I leaned toward Darius. It is all mine, son. Every last cent. Post-divorce income. Nadine gets 0. You get 0. A sound from behind them, a soft thud. We all turned. Nadine was standing there. She must have come through the revolving doors just as I began speaking. She had on a gray tracksuit I recognized from the hotel's lost and found pile. She looked a decade older than she had the night before. Her face was ashen. Her eyes were hollow. She had heard. She had heard the number. 8 million, she breathed. She looked at me. She looked at the man she had thrown away. She looked at the man she had traded for a lie. Clifford, she said. Her voice was equal parts prayer and horror. 8 million. And then her eyes rolled back. She didn't crumble gracefully the way they do in films. She dropped like a stone. She struck the hard marble floor of the hotel entryway with a sickening slap. Mom!" Darius screamed. He and Brianna rushed to her side. They knelt, patting her cheeks, trying to bring her around. "Mom, wake up!" Brianna cried. Then she looked up at me. Her eyes held a new kind of panic. The panic of someone who has just watched the only bridge to paradise catch fire. "Dad, help us!" Brianna screamed. "She's having a heart attack. You have to cover the ambulance. We don't have insurance." I looked at my ex-wife lying on that floor. I looked at the woman who had demanded a life she couldn't sustain and had paid the full price for it. I looked at my son and his wife staring back at me not as a father, but as a walking account balance worth $8 million. I felt no triumph, no joy. What I felt was a deep, settled sense of validation. The math had finally resolved. The ledger was even. I turned to the bus driver. "I'm ready," I said. "But sir," the driver said, gesturing at the scene on the floor, "don't you want to?" I placed a hand on his shoulder. "That is not my family," I said. "That is a cautionary tale." I stepped onto the bus. The doors hissed shut behind me, sealing me inside the warm, quiet cabin. I made my way to a window seat. As the bus eased away from the curb, I looked down one last time. Hotel security was sprinting out to help Nadine. Darius sat on the floor with his head in both hands rocking. Brianna ran after the bus for a few steps, screaming something I couldn't hear through the glass, then gave up and sank onto the sidewalk. I settled back into my seat. I took out my phone. I opened the banking app. I looked at the balance. It was a long string of numbers. Abstract. Enormous. It looked like freedom. I closed the app. I didn't need to keep staring at it. I knew it was there. I watched the city of Philadelphia slide past the glass. The gray buildings, the cold wind. 40 years of hard labor and thankless sacrifice playing back in silence. "Goodbye," I whispered. The bus curved onto the highway, heading toward the airport, toward the ocean, toward a life where the only currency that counted was respect. I was 74 years old. I was alone. And for the first time, I was completely and utterly free. I was still sitting at the window when the engine stalled in its rhythm. The driver kept his foot hovering because a desperate pounding had erupted against the glass door. Rhythmic, frantic, the sound of a bird flying into a window over and over, incapable of grasping what it keeps hitting. I looked down. It was Darius. He had pulled himself away from his unconscious mother. He had stepped past his hysterical wife. He was running alongside the bus palm, slapping the metal face mashed against the glass. His tuxedo shirt was torn. He'd lost one hotel slipper, so he was hopping one bare foot, one sock, on the cold, filthy pavement of the terminal drop-off. "Open the door!" he screamed. "Dad, please open the door!" The driver glanced back at me in the rear view. His eyes asked the question wordlessly. Do we go, or do we wait? I could have nodded. I could have told him to pull away. The easy call. But I am a man who finishes what he starts. You don't walk away from a live wire and leave it exposed. You cap it off. You make it safe. "Open it," I told the driver. "Just for a minute." The air brakes exhaled. The door folded open with a mechanical groan. Darius didn't charge in. He collapsed onto the bottom step. He had no strength left to stand. He crawled up on his hands and knees, hauling himself toward me the way a pilgrim drags himself to a shrine. He smelled of sweat, stale champagne, and fear. He seized my hand. His palms were cold and damp. Dad! He wept, bowing his head until his forehead rested on my knee. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I was wrong. I was stupid. I looked down at the top of his head. The thinning hair he'd always disguised with expensive cuts. The trembling of his shoulders. I know you're sorry, Darius, I said quietly. I know you're hurting. He looked up. Hope flooded his face, desperate, starving hope. He thought he had found the crack in the wall. He thought he had found the father who used to sign his permission slips and cover his parking tickets. You forgive me, he asked, his voice splitting. You won't leave us. You heard what Brianna said. We are homeless, Dad. We have nothing. You have $8 million. You can pull us out of this? I can help you manage it. I learned a lot from Garrison. I know it was a scam, but the principles, I can study them. I can be your asset manager. I withdrew my hand from his grip. He was still pitching. Even at rock bottom, he was still looking for an angle. He didn't want a father. He wanted a backer. I reached into the inside pocket of my coat. I keep a small supply of envelopes there. A man who builds systems stays prepared. Darius noticed the movement. His eyes sharpened. He tracked my hand as it came out of my pocket. He saw the white paper envelope. I watched the calculation run behind his wet eyes in real time. He thought it was a check. He thought it was cash. He thought it was a lifeline. Here, I said, holding the envelope out. Thank you, Dad. Darius breathed. He grabbed it with a speed that was almost predatory. He tore at the flap, shredding the paper in his rush. Thank you. I knew you wouldn't abandon me. I knew you still loved me. He pulled out what was inside. His smile froze, then it crumbled, then it died. It was not a check. It was not a stack of bills. It was a single printed page and a small rectangular ticket. Darius stared at them. He flipped the paper, hunting for money on the other side. He shook the envelope. Nothing else fell out. What is this? He whispered. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, bringing my face level with his. Look at it, Darius. Read it. He raised the ticket. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold focus. Greyhound, he read. One way to Baltimore? Yes, I said. The bus leaves in 2 hours from Terminal C. Baltimore. His voice climbed toward panic. Oh, why Baltimore? I don't know anyone in Baltimore. Exactly, I said. I pointed to the sheet of paper in his other hand. And that, I continued, is a list I put together last night. Temp agencies in the Baltimore metro area that place unskilled labor. Warehouses, construction cleanup, assembly lines. No resume required. They don't care who your father is. They don't care about your credit score. They care whether you show up on time and work until the whistle blows. Darius stared at the page as though it carried a disease. You want me to be a laborer, he gasped. But I'm an executive. I'm a vice president. You were vice president of a hallucination, Darius, I said sharply. In the real world, you are a 35-year-old man with no assets, no marketable skills, and a fraud charge pending. You are not an executive. You are a liability. I settled back in my seat. You said you wanted to be rich, Darius. You stood on that stage and mocked me. You said I was mediocre because I worked with my hands. You called me the past. I pointed at the ticket. Well, that is your future. If you are truly the driven genius you claim to be, if you really have what it takes to become a billionaire, then Baltimore shouldn't frighten you. Go there. Find work. Rent a room. Save what you earn. Build something real. But I can't, he wailed. I can't work in a warehouse. I have soft hands. Then the calluses will teach you what self-respect actually feels like, I said. He tried to push the envelope back at me, pressing it into my chest. No, I don't want this. I want the money. You have $8 million. Give me $1 million. Just $1 million. It's nothing to you. I caught his wrist. My grip was iron, the grip of a man who bent conduit pipe for 4 decades. Darius flinched. It is everything to me, Darius, because I earned it. And handing it to you wouldn't save you. It would destroy you. If I gave you $1 million today, Garrison or someone cut from the same cloth would have every cent by tomorrow. You are a parasite, Darius. Your whole life you have latched onto a host. First me, then your mother, then Garrison. You drain them until there's nothing left, and then you go looking for the next vein. I pushed his hand away. I am removing the host. But I'll starve, he screamed. Brianna will leave me. If she leaves because you're poor, she never loved you, I said. And if you starve, it is because you refuse to eat what you've earned. I looked at the driver. Go, I said. The driver hit the button. The air brakes released with a sharp hiss. Darius understood it was over. He scrambled backward down the steps, terrified of the door closing on him. He landed on the pavement, clutching the envelope and the ticket to his chest, because they were the only things he had left. Dad! He screamed one final time as the doors folded shut. Don't do this. I didn't look away. I watched him through the glass, standing there one slipper on one slipper off, holding a ticket to a harder life. I spoke to him through the window, even knowing he couldn't hear me. I am not doing this to you, son. I am doing this for you. The bus heaved forward. The engine roared. Darius ran alongside for a few yards, but he was spent and we were pulling away. He fell behind. I watched him shrink until he stopped running altogether. I saw him look down at the ticket in his hand. He was alone, truly alone for the first time in his life, completely, terrifyingly alone. And that is the only place where a man can actually be made. I faced forward. The highway unspooled ahead of us, a gray ribbon dissolving into the sky. I picked up my phone. I deleted his number. Then Nadine's. Then Brianna's. My pocket buzzed an email from my architect in Porto. He had sent over the sketches for the new villa I was planning to build. A wide garden, a library, a guest cottage for friends who were real. I opened the file. The colors were warm and bright. The lines were clean. It looked like peace. I am Clifford Hahn. I am 74 years old. I lost a family that never truly existed, but I found a dignity that will never expire. As the bus accelerated toward the departure terminal, I understood that the best investment I ever made wasn't the patent, and it wasn't the savings. It was the bus ticket I had just pressed into my son's hand. If he uses it, he may survive. If he throws it away, he will vanish. But either way, the circuit is closed. The job is done. I closed my eyes and let the motion of the bus carry me into a quiet, satisfied rest. Next stop, Portugal. Next stop, my life. The flight back to Porto was the longest of my life. Not for the distance, for the sheer weight of what I was leaving behind. I slept through most of it, the kind of exhaustion that reaches the bone. But when the wheels met the tarmac in Portugal, when I walked out of the airport and felt that particular warm Atlantic breeze against my face, I felt the last of the shackles fall away. I hailed a taxi to my apartment in the Ribeira district. The driver was an older man who spoke little English, but he smiled when he lifted my bag. I tipped him €20 not to impress anyone, but because I respected the work. He thanked me with a warmth that my own family hadn't shown me in decades. I climbed the stone steps to my door. I put the key in the lock. It turned cleanly. No access codes, no biometrics, no bank threatening to foreclose. Just a simple mechanical lock standing between the world and a space that was entirely mine. Inside, the air carried the scent of lemon polish and the sea. My books were right where I had left them. My chair sat waiting by the window. I set my suitcase down in the hallway and didn't bother unpacking. I went straight to the terrace and doors and pushed them open. The sun was dropping toward the Douro River. The water lay like hammered gold beneath it, reflecting the orange rooftops of the city. I could hear a fado singer rehearsing somewhere down the street in a cafe, a mournful, luminous sound that spoke of fate and open water. I went to the kitchen and uncorked a bottle of wine. Not a $2,000 bottle of Chateau Latour 1997 with a counterfeit label. A €20 bottle of local red from the Alentejo region. I poured a glass and carried it back to the balcony. I took a sip. It tasted of earth and sunlight and honesty. Rich, layered, and without pretension. I sat there a long time watching the light drain away. For years, I had dreaded this exact moment, an old man alone on a balcony. Nadine had always told me that without her, I'd be a pathetic, lonely recluse. Darius had told me that without grandchildren, I would leave behind no legacy. They were wrong. Loneliness is not sitting alone on a terrace in Porto with $8 million in the bank and a clear conscience. Loneliness is sitting at a dinner table with 3 people tallying what you're worth the moment you die. Loneliness is lying next to a woman who is dreaming of a man with a faster car. Loneliness is raising a son who looks at you and sees an obstacle instead of a father. I wasn't lonely. I was solitary, and there is a world of difference. My phone chimed on the table beside me. Not a call from them. I had changed my number the moment I landed. It was an email from the private investigator Gideon. He was closing the file and thought I might want to know the final disposition of what he called the assets. I opened it and read with the detached focus of an engineer studying a post-mortem on a collapsed structure. Nadine. My ex-wife was now living in a studio apartment in a government-subsidized housing complex on the south side of Philadelphia. The police had seized everything that fell outside basic bankruptcy protections. Her jewelry was gone, her furs sold at auction. The money she had wired to Garrison was untraceable, swallowed somewhere in the maze of offshore accounts that investigators were still working to unravel. Gideon noted that she had applied for a position as a greeter at a department store, the same store where she used to drop thousands of dollars a month. The irony was geometric in its perfection. She was now holding doors open for the kind of women she had spent years trying to impress. I wondered whether she thought of me as she stood there for 8 hours a day in sensible shoes. Whether she remembered the man who used to rub her feet after a long evening. Probably not. Most likely she was busy blaming the world for her misfortune, still certain she was a queen living in temporary exile. Garrison, or rather Dale Krupnick. The report indicated he was being held without bail. The federal prosecutor was throwing the full weight of the law at him: wire fraud, identity theft, grand larceny. Because he had crossed state lines, the charges were federal. He was looking at a minimum of 20 years. Gideon included a mugshot. Dale wasn't smiling anymore. He looked diminished. Without the expensive suit, without the rented pearl-white Rolls-Royce Ghost, without the stage lighting, and the crowd, he was just an aging grifter with fear sitting plainly in his eyes. He had spent his life peddling illusions, and now he would spend the remainder of it staring at concrete walls that were brutally, undeniably real. And then there was Darius. The section on Darius was brief. Brianna had filed for divorce 3 days after the wedding disaster. She cited irreconcilable differences, which is lawyer speak, for he ran out of money. She had gone back to her parents in Wisconsin and was already posting photographs on social media alongside a new boyfriend, a car salesman this time. She moved fast. Parasites always do. Darius hadn't contested the divorce. He couldn't afford a lawyer. Gideon had traced him to a boarding house in Baltimore. He had used the bus ticket. He was working nights at a logistics warehouse loading trucks. Hard, punishing work, the kind he used to look down on the exact kind of work I did for 40 years, to buy him his first car. Gideon noted that Darius was living in a single room with a shared bathroom down the hall. No car. He took the bus to work. I set the phone on the table. I took a sip of wine. A pang of sadness moved through me for the boy who used to ride on my shoulders and stretch his arms toward the sky. But I let it pass. That boy was gone. The man in Baltimore was a stranger, but perhaps, just perhaps, the warehouse would teach him what I never could. Perhaps the weight of those boxes and the ache settling into his muscles would finally show him what a dollar actually costs. Perhaps in the quiet of that small room, he would discover his own character at last. Or perhaps he wouldn't. Perhaps he would break. But that was his circuit to repair. I had installed the safety mechanisms. I had provided the tools. The maintenance was his to do. I gazed out at the river again. The lights strung along the bridge were shimmering in the distance like a strand of pearls far more beautiful than the fake diamonds Nadine used to wear. I thought about the new villa I was going to build. I thought about the German engineers I was meeting next week to discuss the European rollout of the patent. I thought about the cooking class I had enrolled in. I realized that for the first time in my life, I was not living for someone else's sake. I was not the provider, not the safety net, not the wallet. I was just Clifford, and Clifford was happy. I finished the wine. The sky had deepened to a rich velvet purple. I rose from the chair and walked to the railing. I pulled in a slow breath of cool night air. I am not a vengeful man. I don't wish any of them harm. That is where Clifford's story brought me, standing at a railing in the night air, watching the river finally at peace. If you have stayed with me this far, thank you. I mean that sincerely. This road cost something real. 40 years of quiet work, of being dismissed and underestimated, of watching people you love choose greed over gratitude. But I believe God does not waste a single one of those years. The patience that looked like weakness turned out to be the very thing that protected everything. The dignity that no one could see was the only thing that lasted. Here is what I want you to take from Clifford's story. Never let anyone convince you that working with your hands is something to be ashamed of. The hands that build things hold real power. If someone shows you who they are by how they treat your sacrifice, believe them the first time. Do not wait 40 years for the second proof. Protect what you build, not out of selfishness, but because a tool in the wrong hands does not help anyone. And when you finally walk away from what was draining, you do not look back with bitterness. Walk toward the life you quietly prepared for yourself. If this story stirred something in you, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what moment hit you hardest, or what you would have done differently in Clifford's place. And if you know someone who is carrying a quiet burden right now, someone who needs to be reminded that dignity is never wasted, please share this story with them. It might be exactly what they need to hear today. Subscribe to Family Revenge Stories if you haven't already, so you never miss one of these. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.